I am Desmond Carver, 74 years old, and I spent my entire life building an empire in the shadows. I always believed that blood was thicker than water, but I learned the hard way that blood means absolutely nothing when greed takes over. I was late for Thanksgiving dinner at my daughter's house. The freezing rain soaked my clothes as I stood on her porch, but when I looked through the glass door, I saw my son-in-law making a toast. He raised his crystal glass and said, "I hope the old man is gone for good. We are finally getting the house." My own daughter laughed along with their wealthy friends. I did not knock. I walked away. But when I got to my truck and checked my phone, I realized the betrayal was much worse. $80,000 had just been drained from my account. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The November rain in Chicago is unforgiving. It cuts right through your bones, but the cold outside was nothing compared to the ice that formed in my chest as I stood on the porch of that house. It was a massive $2 million home in a gated suburban neighborhood, a house with a manicured lawn, a heated driveway, and floor-to-ceiling windows that practically screamed money. Through those large glass windows, I could see the dining room perfectly illuminated by a crystal chandelier. The long oak table was covered with a feast, a golden roasted turkey, expensive bottles of wine, and fine silver cutlery. Around the table sat my daughter Maya and her husband Preston Sterling. They were surrounded by their friends, a group of upper-class, well-dressed white couples who looked like they stepped right out of a financial magazine. I was 30 minutes late. My old Chevy truck had trouble starting in the cold. I had rushed there holding a box of the pecan pie my late wife Vivian used to make, hoping to share a piece of tradition with my only child. I raised my hand to knock on the heavy wooden door, but my knuckles never touched the wood. Preston was standing at the head of the table. He tapped his spoon against his wine glass, calling for silence. The room quieted down. Preston is 35 years old, a hotshot director at a downtown hedge fund. He wears tailored suits, expensive watches, and has an ego the size of a skyscraper. From the day Maya brought him home, he looked at my calloused hands and my faded canvas jacket like they were a disease. He thought I was just a broke, retired construction worker living off Social Security. I let him believe it. I let Maya believe it too. When Vivian died 10 years ago, I realized that handing Maya a mountain of cash would ruin her. I wanted her to build her own life to understand the value of hard work. So I kept my commercial real estate empire a secret. I drove my old truck, lived in my modest house, and watched from the sidelines. Through the glass, I watched Preston raise his glass of expensive red wine. He had a smug, arrogant grin on his face. "A toast," Preston announced, his voice carrying clearly through the crack in the window, weather stripping. A toast to the fact that my dear father-in-law, the old bricklayer, decided not to show up tonight. Honestly, his dusty boots would have ruined the Persian rug anyway. A few of his friends chuckled. Maya, my 32-year-old daughter, the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders, did not defend me. She simply swirled her wine and smiled. But Preston was not finished. He took a sip and leaned forward, looking directly at Maya. "And a special toast to our future. I hope the old man is gone for good soon. His mind is clearly slipping anyway. Once he is out of the picture, we are finally getting his property. We can bulldoze that old shack of his and flip the lot for a massive profit. Cheers to early inheritance." The entire table erupted in laughter. Maya laughed too. She leaned into Preston, kissing his cheek, her eyes shining with pure, unadulterated greed. I stood there in the freezing rain holding the box of pecan pie. The rain dripped down the brim of my hat and mixed with the sudden sharp sting of tears in my eyes. But I did not cry. Crying is a luxury for the weak. 40 years of pouring concrete, negotiating ruthless contracts, and surviving in a world that wanted to see a black man fail had made my skin thicker than armor. The pain of seeing my daughter laugh at my supposed death vanished in a fraction of a second. It was replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. I did not push the door open. I did not storm in and yell. Yelling is what powerless people do when they have no other options. True power does not make a sound until the trap is completely shut. I slowly lowered my hand from the door. I turned my back to the warm, brightly lit house and walked down the long paved driveway back to my car. My 1998 Chevy Silverado was parked on the street, blending into the shadows. I opened the door, climbed inside, and started the engine. The heater barely worked, blowing lukewarm air against my freezing hands. I sat in the darkness, the sound of the rain hitting the roof of the truck, the only noise in the silence. They thought I was losing my mind. They thought my house was just an old shack they could sell for a quick buck. They had no idea that the very house they were sitting in, the $2 million mansion they used to impress their snobby friends, was quietly paid for in cash by a shell company that I completely owned. They thought they were the masters of the universe, waiting for an old fool to die. I reached into the inner pocket of my wet jacket and pulled out my phone. It was an older model, nothing flashy, but the applications inside it connected me directly to my financial network. A nagging thought crawled into the back of my mind. Why was Preston so eager to get his hands on my old property? A hedge fund manager making mid-six figures should not care about a modest suburban lot, unless he was not making mid-six figures anymore, unless the perfect life they were parading in front of their friends was a complete lie. I opened my banking application. Years ago, when Maya was in college, I opened a joint emergency checking account with her. I put exactly $80,000 in it. I told her it was my entire life savings, meant only for a medical emergency or a life or death situation. I had not checked that specific account in months because I never used it. The screen loaded in the dark cabin of the truck. The white light illuminated my wrinkled face. I stared at the numbers on the screen. The available balance was 0. I blinked, thinking the cold was messing with my vision. I refreshed the application. The number did not change. $0. I tapped on the transaction history. My heart beat slowly, a steady, heavy rhythm. The money had not been slowly drained over time. It was not used to pay off a slow accumulation of debt. The entire $80,000 had been withdrawn in a single massive wire transfer. I looked at the timestamp on the transaction. It happened exactly 2 hours ago, right as they were preparing their luxurious Thanksgiving dinner, right before Preston raised his glass to wish for my death. My daughter and her husband had just stolen what they believed was my entire life savings on Thanksgiving night. A normal father would have called the police. A normal father would have knocked on the door, demanded answers, and begged for his money back. But I was not a normal father anymore. The father died the moment Maya laughed at that toast. The man sitting in this truck was Desmond Carver, the ruthless businessman who had crushed corporate competitors for decades without leaving a fingerprint. Why would a wealthy hedge fund manager and his socialite wife need $80,000 in liquid cash on a holiday evening? You do not use a wire transfer on Thanksgiving night to buy a car or pay a mortgage. You use it because you are in deep, immediate trouble. You use it because someone is holding a knife to your throat. I put the truck in gear. I looked at the bright, warm windows of my daughter's house one last time. They were eating turkey and drinking fine wine, celebrating my destruction. Smile while you can, Preston, I whispered into the empty cabin of my truck, because tomorrow morning I am going to tear your perfect world down to the studs, and I am not going to stop until you have absolutely nothing left. I drove away into the cold, dark rain, leaving their house behind. The war had officially begun. I am Desmond Carver, 74 years old, and I spent my entire life building an empire in the shadows. I always believed that blood was thicker than water, but I learned the hard way that blood means absolutely nothing when greed takes over. I was late for Thanksgiving dinner at my daughter's house. The freezing rain soaked my clothes as I stood on her porch. But when I looked through the glass door, I saw my son-in-law making a toast. He raised his crystal glass and said, "I hope the old man is gone for good. We are finally getting the house." My own daughter laughed along with their wealthy friends. I did not knock. I walked away. But when I got to my truck and checked my phone, I realized the betrayal was much worse. $80,000 had just been drained from my account. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The sun rose over the south side of Chicago the next morning, casting long, pale shadows across my kitchen. I sat at my small Formica table drinking a cup of cheap black coffee. I did not sleep. I spent the entire night sitting in the dark, watching the rain hit the window, feeling the last remnants of my fatherly illusions wash away. A normal man would have woken up and called his daughter. A normal man would have screamed through the phone demanding his $80,000 back. But I had already told you I am not a normal man. I am a builder. And when a builder finds rot in the foundation, he does not yell at the wood. He grabs a sledgehammer and starts swinging. At exactly 7 in the morning, I did not call Maya. I picked up my phone and dialed a private number. The woman who answered on the second ring was Roxanne. Roxanne is a forensic accountant. She is brilliant, ruthless, and charges $1,000 an hour. She is one of the very few people in the world who knows the true extent of the Carver real estate empire. I have kept her on retainer for 15 years to ensure my corporate shell companies remain bulletproof. "Good morning, Desmond," Roxanne said, her voice sharp and wide awake. "You do not call me on a holiday weekend unless someone is bleeding." "Someone is about to," I replied, my voice raspy from the sleepless night. "I need you to trace a wire transfer. It went out of my emergency joint checking account at 8 o'clock last night. Exactly $80,000. I need to know where it landed, who holds the account, and how fast you can get me the paper trail." "Give me 10 minutes, she said, and the line went dead. I sat in the silence of my kitchen, listening to the old refrigerator hum. $80,000. For a man like Preston, who bragged about his massive bonuses and drove a brand new Porsche, $80,000 should have been pocket change. Why steal it from a retirement account? Why take such a stupid, obvious risk? My phone vibrated on the table. It had been exactly 12 minutes. "Roxanne is always fast. I have the trace, Desmond," she said, and her tone was unusually serious. "This is not a normal transfer. The money did not go to a credit card company, a mortgage lender, or a luxury car dealership. It was bounced through 2 intermediary banks in Delaware and then wired offshore. It was converted into cryptocurrency and deposited into an untraceable digital wallet registered in the Cayman Islands." I gripped my coffee mug tightly. Cryptocurrency, offshore accounts, untraceable digital wallets. You do not move money like that to pay for a vacation. You move money like that when you are hiding something illegal or when you are paying someone who operates in the shadows. "Can you find out who owns the wallet?" I asked. "It will take some digging," Roxanne replied. But Desmond guys in fancy suits only buy untraceable cryptocurrency for 2 reasons. They are either hiding assets from the government or they are paying off blackmail. I am going to run a full background sweep on your son-in-law. Something is rotting in his financial profile. "Do it," I said. "Tear his life apart. Find every loose thread." Just as I hung up with Roxanne, my phone began to ring again. The caller identification flashed on the screen. It was Maya. I stared at the name. Maya. My little girl. The girl I taught to ride a bicycle in the alley behind our first cramped apartment. The girl I worked double shifts for so she could attend a private university and never have to scrub floors like her mother and I did. I took a deep, steadying breath, burying the pain deep down where she could not reach it. I pressed answer and put the phone to my ear. "Hi, Daddy," Maya said. Her voice was dripping with a sugary fake sweetness that made my stomach physically turn. "We missed you so much last night. Where were you?" We waited and waited. The lie was so smooth, so effortless. I pictured her sitting at her massive dining table, surrounded by her rich friends, laughing at the thought of me dying. "I am sorry, sweetie," I said, forcing my voice to sound weak like a confused old man. The truck would not start in the cold. And my memory, you know how it is lately. I just felt so tired. I must have fallen asleep in my chair. "Oh, Daddy," she sighed, playing the role of the deeply concerned daughter perfectly. "You have to be more careful. Preston was so worried about you. He almost drove over there in the storm to check on you. Preston was worried." I almost laughed out loud. He was so worried that he toasted to my death. I kept my tone perfectly fragile. "Tell Preston I appreciate his concern. I am just a tired old man." "Well, I am glad you are okay," she continued, shifting her tone slightly. "Listen, Daddy, I was actually thinking about Mom this morning. With the holidays here, I really miss her. Do you remember that old iron safe you keep down in the basement? I want to come over this afternoon and open it. I want to look at her old jewelry and maybe take a few of her keepsakes." The request hit me like a physical blow. It took all of my discipline not to break character. My wife Vivian's jewelry was not in that safe. Maya knew that. Vivian's jewelry was in a safety deposit box at the bank, and Maya already had the key to that. What was actually inside that heavy rusted iron safe in my basement? Old property deeds, tax documents, and what Maya and Preston believed was the original unencumbered deed to the very house I was currently sitting in. They did not want my dead wife's keepsakes. They wanted the paperwork to my house. They had stolen the cash and now they were coming for the property. The $80,000 was not enough. They were escalating. "Oh, the old safe," I stammered, making my voice shake. "Maya, sweetheart, I have not opened that rusty thing in years. That is okay, Dad." She pushed her voice tightening with a subtle impatience. "Just give me the combination. Or let me borrow the master key. Preston can come over and pry it open if he has to. We just really want to preserve those family memories." I closed my eyes. The sheer manipulation was staggering. I let out a long, pathetic sigh into the receiver. My memory is just failing me today, Maya. My head is so cloudy. I cannot remember the combination right now, and I have no idea where the key is. Give me a few days to look for it. My joints are hurting too much to go down into the basement today. There was a sharp silence on the line. I could hear her breathing. She was frustrated. She needed that safe open today. Dad, you really need to start writing these things down. She snapped the fake sweetness cracking for just a second before she caught herself. Okay, fine. Rest up. But Preston and I are going to come over soon to help you look for it. We cannot have you living in a mess. We love you. I love you too, I said, and hung up the phone. I dropped the device onto the table. They were coming for the house. Why the sudden rush? Why the panic on a holiday weekend? The $80,000 vanished into thin air, and within 12 hours, they were trying to raid my safe. 10 minutes later, the answer arrived. Roxanne called back. Her voice was completely devoid of its usual calm professionalism. It was tight, urgent, and sharp. Desmond, you need to listen to me very carefully, Roxanne said. I just pulled a massive favor from a contact at the Securities and Exchange Commission. I looked into Preston Sterling. What did you find? I asked, my posture straightening. Preston is drowning Desmond. His hedge fund initiated a quiet internal audit 3 days ago. Several $1 million are missing from a client investment pool. Preston is the primary fund manager. He is being investigated for massive corporate embezzlement. If he does not replace that money before the audit concludes next week, he is not just going to get fired. He is going to federal prison. The pieces of the puzzle violently snapped together in my mind. The stolen $80,000 was probably a desperate payment to a blackmailer or a quick patch to hide a digital footprint. But it was not enough. They needed millions. And the only way to get millions fast was to liquidate real estate. My real estate. They are desperate, I whispered to myself. Beyond desperate, Roxanne confirmed. Desmond, a cornered animal, will chew its own leg off to escape. A cornered finance broker will do much worse. You need to watch your back. Let them come, I said, staring out the window at the gray Chicago sky. My voice was no longer that of a confused, tired old man. It was the voice of the man who built an empire from the dirt up. I am going to let them dig their own graves. I hung up the phone. My daughter and her husband were planning to strip me down to the bone to save themselves from a prison sentence. They thought they were playing a brilliant game against a helpless target. But they had no idea that they had just walked blindly onto a battlefield, and I was holding all the ammunition. I am Desmond Carver, 74 years old, and I spent my entire life building an empire in the shadows. I always believed that blood was thicker than water, but I learned the hard way that blood means absolutely nothing when greed takes over. I was late for Thanksgiving dinner at my daughter's house. The freezing rain soaked my clothes as I stood on her porch. But when I looked through the glass door, I saw my son-in-law making a toast. He raised his crystal glass and said, "I hope the old man is gone for good. We are finally getting the house." My own daughter laughed along with their wealthy friends. I did not knock. I walked away. But when I got to my truck and checked my phone, I realized the betrayal was much worse. $80,000 had just been drained from my account. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I was sitting in the worn-out leather recliner in my living room watching the dust motes dance in the pale winter light. I knew they were coming. Predators can never resist the urge to circle their prey. Before I stood up, I reached into the breast pocket of my thick flannel shirt. My fingers brushed against the small rectangular shape of a digital voice recorder. I clicked the button. The tiny red light blinked on, hidden beneath the heavy fabric. Let the games begin. I opened the front door slowly, hunching my shoulders just a fraction to make myself look a little smaller, a little weaker. Maya stood on the porch wrapped in a designer cashmere coat. Preston loomed right behind her, but they were not alone. Standing next to my son-in-law was a man I had never seen before. He was in his late 40s, wearing a suit that was trying too hard to look expensive and holding a leather briefcase that looked brand new. He had the nervous, shifty eyes of a man who was stepping outside of his comfort zone. "Hi, Daddy," Maya said, pushing past me into the hallway. Her voice was dripping with that same fake, sugary concern from the phone call. "We wanted to come check on you, and we brought someone to help." Preston closed the door behind them and placed a heavy hand on the shoulder of the stranger. "Desmond, this is Dr. Arthur Vance. He is a premier geriatric specialist in the city. We paid out of pocket to have him come do a private wellness check on you. You have been so forgetful lately, and after you missed Thanksgiving dinner, Maya and I were just so worried about your cognitive health. We want to make sure your mind is doing okay." I looked at Dr. Vance. A real specialist in this city would charge thousands for a house call on a holiday weekend, and they would carry themselves with an air of absolute authority. This man was sweating around his collar. He avoided my eyes. He was no top-tier specialist. He was a hired gun, a desperate actor wearing a stethoscope. "Oh, a doctor," I stammered, making my voice tremble just enough to sound vulnerable. "I do not need a doctor, Maya. I am just tired. My joints ache when the weather turns cold. That is all." "Now, Desmond Preston," said, his tone patronizing like he was speaking to a toddler. "Let the professional do his job. It is just a few simple questions. We need to make sure you are safe living all by yourself in this old house." They guided me back to my leather recliner. The fake doctor sat on the edge of my sofa, pulling a notepad and a pen from his briefcase. Maya stood by the window, her arms crossed, watching me with a cold, analytical gaze. Preston leaned against the wall, a smug shadow waiting for his victory. "Mr. Carver!" The doctor began, his voice lacking any real medical bedside manner. "I'm going to ask you a series of very simple questions to test your memory and cognitive function. Can you tell me what day of the week it is and what the current year is?" I stared at him blankly for a long, uncomfortable moment. I let my jaw go slightly slack. I made my eyes look distant and cloudy. I am a man who negotiates complex, multi-million-dollar commercial leases in my head. I know the exact interest rate on every property I own down to the decimal. But today, I was going to give them the exact performance they came to see. It is the holidays," I muttered, rubbing my forehead as if I was struggling to find the words. 19. "No, it is 2000. It is the weekend, I think." The doctor scribbled something down on his notepad. He did not correct me. Preston shifted his weight, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Okay," the doctor continued. "I want you to draw a clock face for me, put the numbers in the correct positions, and set the hands to read 10 minutes past 11. He handed me his pen and the notepad. I took the pen. I let my hand shake visibly. I pressed the tip to the paper and drew a lopsided broken circle. I clustered all the numbers on the right side of the circle, scribbling them messily. I drew the hands completely outside the shape. I handed the notepad back to him with a confused, helpless expression. Maya let out a heavy sigh. It was a perfect performance of a daughter heartbroken by her father's mental decline. But I knew the truth. She was relieved. She was thrilled that I was failing. I reached for the glass of water resting on the small wooden table next to my chair. I intentionally misjudged the distance. My trembling fingers hit the side of the glass, knocking it over. The water spilled across the table and dripped onto the floor, shattering the glass into pieces. "Oh, look what I did," I mumbled, shrinking back into my chair, acting deeply ashamed. "I am so clumsy today. I am sorry." Maya rolled her eyes. "Do not worry about it, Dad," she said sharply, the mask slipping for a fraction of a second. "I will go to the kitchen and get some towels to clean up your mess." She walked out of the room. I looked up at Preston. I let a vacant, lost smile spread across my face. "Thank you for coming, Patrick," I said deliberately, using the wrong name. "You are a good boy to look after me." Preston's arrogant smile stretched from ear to ear. He looked at the doctor, then back at me. "It is Preston, old man," he said softly, no longer bothering to hide his contempt. "But you are welcome." I closed my eyes and let my head rest back against the chair, pretending that the mental exertion had completely exhausted me. I breathed slowly and heavily, feigning a light sleep. With Maya in the kitchen and me supposedly dozing off, Preston and the fake doctor stepped away from the chairs. They moved toward the hallway archway just a few feet from where I sat. They thought I was oblivious. They thought I was an empty shell of a human being. They forgot that sound travels, and they had no idea that the digital recorder in my pocket was capturing every single breath they took. "Are we done here?" Preston whispered harshly. "Did you get enough for the paperwork?" The fake doctor sounded nervous. He is definitely showing signs, but usually a legal diagnosis requires brain scans and a history of decline. This is very fast. I do not pay you to give me medical opinions. Preston hissed, his voice venomous and urgent. I pay you to write the prescription I need. Put it in the official file that he has stage 2 dementia and is no longer fit to manage his own affairs. Sign the evaluation and I will transfer the remaining $10,000 to your account tonight. Just get it done. Understood, the doctor whispered back. The paperwork will be ready by tomorrow morning. I kept my eyes shut, my breathing steady. $10,000. Preston was paying a corrupt, unlicensed hack $10,000 to forge a medical diagnosis of dementia. Maya returned from the kitchen with a handful of paper towels. She wiped up the water, her movements aggressive and impatient. Well, Dr. Vance, she said loudly, waking me from my fake sleep. What is the verdict? Is my father going to be okay? The doctor cleared his throat, putting on his professional mask once again. I am afraid the cognitive tests show significant decline, Mrs. Sterling. I will need to file a formal evaluation, but it is my medical recommendation that your father should not be living alone, nor should he be handling his own financial or legal matters. He is a danger to himself. Maya put a hand over her mouth, faking a gasp of shock. Oh, Daddy, this is so tragic. But do not worry, we will take over from here. We will manage everything. They stayed for another 10 minutes, offering fake sympathies and hollow promises of care before finally walking out the front door. The moment the lock clicked shut behind them, the trembling in my hands stopped completely. The confusion in my eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, razor-sharp focus. I stood up from the recliner. My back was perfectly straight. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the digital recorder. I pressed stop, then hit playback. The audio was crystal clear. Preston's voice echoed in the quiet living room. Put it in the official file that he has stage 2 dementia. I will transfer the remaining $10,000 to your account tonight. I stopped the recording and slipped the device back into my pocket. The puzzle was now complete. They did not just want to break into my safe to steal the deed to my house. They were playing a much bigger, much more sinister game. With a certified medical diagnosis of dementia, Preston and Maya were going to petition the court. They were going to file for a full conservatorship. They wanted to strip me of my legal capacity, taking away my right to sign documents, access my own bank accounts, or make decisions about my own life. Once the court granted them guardianship, they would not need to steal from my safe. They would legally own me. They could liquidate every asset I possessed, sell my house from under me, and lock me away in a cheap, forgotten nursing home while they used my lifetime of hard work to save Preston from federal prison. They thought they had just secured the ultimate victory. They thought they had trapped an old, defenseless man. But as I picked up the phone to call my lawyer, a grim smile crossed my face. They were about to learn that the old man they were trying to bury was the one who owned the graveyard. I am Desmond Carver, 74 years old, and I spent my entire life building an empire in the shadows. I always believed that blood was thicker than water, but I learned the hard way that blood means absolutely nothing when greed takes over. I was late for Thanksgiving dinner at my daughter's house. The freezing rain soaked my clothes as I stood on her porch. But when I looked through the glass door, I saw my son-in-law making a toast. He raised his crystal glass and said, "I hope the old man is gone for good. We are finally getting the house." My own daughter laughed along with their wealthy friends. I did not knock. I walked away. But when I got to my truck and checked my phone, I realized the betrayal was much worse. $80,000 had just been drained from my account. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. As soon as Preston and Maya's luxury sport utility vehicle disappeared down my street, I locked the front door. The fake doctor and his fabricated dementia diagnosis were gone, leaving behind a silence in my house that felt heavier than concrete. I did not waste a single second. I reached for my secure phone and dialed the second number on my priority list. If Roxanne was my financial scalpel, Victor was my legal sledgehammer. Victor has been my personal attorney for over 3 decades. He is a man who speaks softly but carries the weight of 1,000 courtrooms. He knows every legal loophole, every hidden clause, and every dirty trick in the city of Chicago. Victor arrived at my house exactly 40 minutes later. He did not bother to knock. He used his spare key and walked straight into my kitchen, carrying a thick, scuffed leather briefcase. He sat across from me at the small wooden table, his expression completely unreadable, a stone wall forged by years of ruthless litigation. "You were right to call me immediately, Desmond," Victor said, unbuckling the straps of his briefcase and pulling out a heavy stack of documents. "Roxanne sent me the financial trace on Preston this morning. I spent the last few hours digging into the public county records and the banking liens. What I found is going to make your blood boil." I leaned back in my chair. "Lay it out for me, Victor. I have spent the last 24 hours watching my family plot my demise. I do not think anything can surprise me anymore. I was wrong." Victor placed a glossy folder on the table. 5 years ago, when Maya married Preston, I gave her a wedding gift that most parents can only dream of providing. I bought them a stunning $2 million mansion in the upscale suburbs. I paid for it entirely in cash. There was no mortgage, no interest, no debt whatsoever. I wanted my daughter to start her married life with absolute financial security. I wanted her to have a solid roof over her head that no bank could ever take away. I placed the deed in a protective family trust, ensuring that the property could not be leveraged or sold without my explicit written consent as the primary guarantor. Victor slid a thick stapled legal document across the table. "This is a commercial mortgage agreement," Victor explained, his voice low and steady, striking the quiet kitchen like a gavel. "It was taken out 18 months ago against Maya's house. They borrowed $1.5 million against the equity of the property." I stared at the paper, my mind briefly rejecting the information. "That is legally impossible," I said. "The house is locked tightly in the trust. They absolutely cannot borrow a single dime against that equity without the primary guarantor's signature, and I have never signed anything of the sort." Victor did not say a word. He just reached across the table and tapped his index finger on the last page of the document. I pulled the papers closer and flipped to the signature page. My breath caught in my throat. There in black ink was my name, Desmond Carver. The loops, the specific slant, the sharp angles of the letters. It looked exactly like my signature. It was a flawless replication, but I had never held the pen that signed this paper. I reached out and touched the ink. The betrayal radiated from the page, cold, toxic, and utterly devastating. Preston did not forge this document. Preston did not know the exact way I crossed my letters or the precise pressure I applied to the paper. Only one person in the world had watched me sign enough checks, business contracts, and birthday cards to replicate my handwriting with such terrifying perfection. Maya, my own flesh and blood. The little girl I had protected from the harshness of the world, the child I had poured concrete for in the freezing rain just to pay for her piano lessons, had forged my signature to mortgage the very home I freely gave her. Why, I whispered. The word felt like crushed glass in my throat. Why would they need $1.5 million in cash when Preston makes a fortune at the hedge fund? Victor pulled out another file, this one filled with banking statements and wire transfers. "Preston is not just embezzling from his hedge fund to keep up appearances," Victor said. "He has a sickness, Desmond, a severe, uncontrollable gambling addiction. He owes massive, crippling debts to an illegal sports betting syndicate operating out of Las Vegas. They burned through the entire $1.5 million in less than a year. He lost it all on high-stakes games, desperately trying to chase his losses and dig himself out of the hole." I closed my eyes. The jagged pieces of the puzzle were finally snapping together, forming a horrifying picture. The stolen $80,000 from my emergency account on Thanksgiving night was just a desperate bandage. It was a panicked, last-minute payment to keep his kneecaps from being broken by violent loan sharks. But the bank does not care about loan sharks or gambling debts. The bank only cares about the paper, and the paper said they owed a fortune. "Here is the worst part," Victor continued, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the finality of an executioner. "Because the massive mortgage has not been paid in over 6 months, the bank has officially initiated foreclosure proceedings. They are seizing the mansion. The final eviction date has already been set by the courts." I looked up at him, my eyes hard. "When is the deadline?" "December 25th, Victor said flatly. "Christmas Day. By the time the holidays are over, Preston and Maya will be locked out of the house. They will be homeless, totally bankrupt, and Preston will be facing federal indictments for his hedge fund embezzlement. The cold reality settled over me like a heavy winter coat. December 25th. That was the ticking clock hanging over their heads. That was why they were moving so recklessly fast. That was why they brought that fake sweating doctor to my house today. If the bank took their mansion on Christmas, their perfect wealthy facade would be utterly destroyed. Preston would go to federal prison and Maya would be left with absolutely nothing. They needed millions in cash immediately to pay off the defaulted mortgage and silence the furious hedge fund auditors. And the only place left on earth to get that kind of cash was my estate. By getting a judge to declare me mentally incompetent with a forged dementia diagnosis, Preston could petition the court to become my legal conservator. As my conservator, he could legally bypass the family trust. He could liquidate my commercial properties, drain my retirement accounts, and sell my own modest house right out from under my feet. They were not just going to throw me in a bleak, forgotten nursing home to rot. They were going to strip me of everything I had built over 40 years of blood and sweat just to pay for Preston's gambling debts. I looked at the forged signature on the mortgage document one more time. The last shred of fatherly mercy I had left in my heart withered and turned to ash. I was no longer a grieving father. I was a businessman whose territory had been invaded. They wanted to play a game of ruthless survival. They wanted to see what happened when you force a man into a corner and try to steal his life's work. But they forgot one crucial, fatal detail. I was not the cornered animal in this scenario. They were. I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs with absolute clarity. "Victor," I said, my voice perfectly steady, completely devoid of any emotion. "I want to buy their debt." Victor raised an eyebrow, a rare sign of surprise from the veteran lawyer. "You want to pay off their mortgage to save them?" "No," I replied, looking him dead in the eye, my gaze as cold as a Chicago winter. "I want to buy the debt directly from the bank through one of our anonymous commercial shell companies. I want to own the paper. I want to be the landlord. I want to be the one holding the hammer when the clock strikes midnight on Christmas." Victor's lips curled into a slow, dangerous smile. He closed his briefcase with a sharp, satisfying snap. "Consider it done, Desmond. I did not go to the police. Calling the authorities would be too easy, too swift. When a man tries to bury you alive, you do not simply hand him over to the law so he can hire a slick defense attorney and drag the process out for years in a clean, air-conditioned courtroom. You do not let the system handle your revenge. You take away the very ground he stands on. You let him feel the walls closing in. Over the next 48 hours, my lawyer Victor went to work. I authorized him to use the full, terrifying weight of the Carver real estate empire. I did not just want to stop Preston and Maya. I wanted to own their destruction. Victor reached out to the bank that held the forged $1.5 million commercial mortgage on Maya's house. Banks are simple creatures. They do not care about family drama or forged signatures as long as the balance sheet is clean. Through a layered, untraceable shell company named Apex Horizon Investments, I bought the debt directly from the bank. I paid them the full $1.5 million in cash plus the late penalties and transferred the lien to my own corporate entity. But I did not stop there. Preston's gambling debts were the real poison driving him. He owed over $200,000 to a violent sports betting syndicate operating out of Las Vegas. These were not men who sent politely worded letters. These were men who sent people to break your legs in a dark parking lot. Victor used a third-party intermediary to contact the syndicate. We offered to buy Preston's markers for pennies on the dollar, paying them in clean, untraceable cash. For the mob, it was an easy choice. They took the money and washed their hands of him. Within 2 days, without Preston even realizing it, his entire financial existence changed hands. I did not forgive his debt. I absorbed it. I became his bank. I became his loan shark. I owned the roof over his head, and I owned the very air he breathed. Every desperate criminal move Preston was making to save himself was now happening inside a cage that I had personally built. He thought he was playing chess against a senile old man, but he was actually just a rat running on a wheel I controlled. On Thursday morning, the doorbell rang. It was raining again, a cold, relentless drizzle that matched the ice in my veins. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping a fresh cup of hot black coffee. I did not need to look out the window to know who it was. The heavy, impatient pounding on the wooden door told me everything I needed to know. It was the sound of a drowning man. I stood up slowly, keeping my posture slightly hunched, maintaining the illusion of the fragile father. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. Preston stood on my porch, and he looked absolutely awful. The confident, arrogant hedge fund manager who had toasted to my death just days ago was gone. His usually perfect blonde hair was uncombed and plastered to his forehead by the rain. The bags under his eyes were dark purple and heavy. The expensive tailored suit he wore hung a little looser on his frame, wrinkled and damp. The sheer panic of the looming corporate audit, the missing millions, and his massive debts was eating him alive from the inside out. He smelled of stale, expensive scotch and raw, unadulterated fear. He did not wait for an invitation. He pushed past me, stepping his wet, expensive leather shoes all over my clean hardwood floor. He did not bring Maya this time. He did not bring his fake doctor. He brought a sleek leather portfolio, clutching it to his chest like a life preserver. "Desmond," he said, his voice breathless and tight, "we need to handle this right now. Sit down." I closed the front door quietly and shuffled back to my chair at the kitchen table. I wrapped my hands around my hot coffee mug, looking up at him with a blank, confused expression. "What is wrong, Preston? You look sick." He threw the leather portfolio down on the table right next to my mug. He unzipped it with shaking hands and pulled out a thick stack of legal papers. "Maya is practically making herself sick with worry over your mental state," he lied, pacing back and forth across my kitchen. "The doctor said your cognitive decline is severe. You should not be making any financial or medical decisions on your own anymore. It is too dangerous." He slid the stack of papers across the table. The bold black letters at the top of the page read, "Durable medical power of attorney and financial proxy." It was their golden ticket. This was the shortcut they were hoping for. If I signed this document, Preston would not even need to wait for a judge to declare me incompetent. He would not need to file a lengthy court petition. With my signature on that paper, he could walk into my bank tomorrow afternoon and legally drain every single account I had. He could sign the deed to my house over to himself. He could erase my entire life with a stroke of a pen. "Sign it," Preston commanded, pulling a silver fountain pen from his inside pocket and tossing it onto the paper. "It just gives Maya and me the ability to manage your health care and pay your bills if you get confused. It is for your own good. You are losing your grip, old man. Let us take the wheel before you ruin everything." I looked down at the pen. I did not touch it. I slowly lifted my gaze and locked eyes with my son-in-law. I dropped the confused, fragile act completely. My eyes were steady, sharp, and completely devoid of fear. "I pay my own bills just fine, Preston," I said, my voice dropping to a low, powerful rumble that he had never heard from me before. "I do not need you managing my money. And I certainly do not need a man who cannot even balance his own checkbook telling me how to run my life." The words hit him like a physical blow to the chest. The fake smile dropped from his face. The mask of the concerned son-in-law shattered into a million jagged pieces on my kitchen floor. He stopped pacing. He stared at me, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and sudden violent rage. He realized in that split second that the old man he thought he was manipulating was not playing along. His face turned a deep, furious crimson. The sheer desperation of his situation boiled over. He slammed his hands down on the table, leaning over me until I could feel the heat radiating from his face. "Listen to me, you stubborn old fool," he hissed, spittle flying from his lips. "You do not have a choice anymore. You are going to sign this paper today." "No," I said smoothly. "I'm not signing anything. Take your papers and get out of my house." Preston snapped. He lost all rational control. With a feral, frustrated grunt, he grabbed my heavy ceramic mug of hot coffee and violently swept his arm across the table. The scalding dark liquid splashed directly onto my chest and lap. The burning coffee soaked through my thick flannel shirt, stinging my skin with searing heat. The mug crashed onto the floor, shattering into sharp white shards across the wood. I did not flinch. I did not scream. I did not even blink. I just sat there perfectly still, letting the hot coffee drip down my clothes, staring up into the eyes of a dead man walking. "You listen to me, you old black fool," Preston snarled, his voice trembling with venom and pure, unadulterated panic. "You are nothing but a washed-up, dirt-covered bricklayer. I am giving you the easy way out. If you do not pick up that pen and sign this right now, I will take that dementia diagnosis straight to a judge tomorrow morning. The court will force you into a miserable state-run facility, and they will hand me the keys to your entire pathetic life anyway. You will rot in a diaper in a forgotten room, and Maya and I will spend every single dime you ever made. Sign the damn paper. I looked at the coffee stains on my shirt, then back up at his red, sweating face. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Preston, I whispered. Now get off my property. He glared at me with pure hatred for 5 agonizing seconds. Then he snatched the blank papers off the table, turned on his heel, and stormed out of my house, slamming the front door so hard the walls shook. I sat in the quiet kitchen, the burn on my chest pulsing. A cold, dark smile spread across my face. He had played his hand. He had shown his true face, and he had no idea that the trapdoor had just closed permanently above his head. I am Desmond Carver, 74 years old, and I spent my entire life building an empire in the shadows. I always believed that blood was thicker than water, but I learned the hard way that blood means absolutely nothing when greed takes over. I was late for Thanksgiving dinner at my daughter's house. The freezing rain soaked my clothes as I stood on her porch. But when I looked through the glass door, I saw my son-in-law making a toast. He raised his crystal glass and said, "I hope the old man is gone for good." We are finally getting the house. My own daughter laughed along with their wealthy friends. I did not knock. I walked away. But when I got to my truck and checked my phone, I realized the betrayal was much worse. $80,000 had just been drained from my account. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Preston moved exactly as I knew he would. Desperation makes a man predictable. He did not waste time licking his wounds after I threw him out of my house. Less than 24 hours later, a process server knocked on my door and handed me a thick manila envelope. It was an emergency summons to a closed probate court hearing. Preston and Maya had officially filed a petition for temporary emergency conservatorship. Attached to the petition was the forged medical document from the sweating fake doctor they had brought to my living room. It detailed a rapid, aggressive onset of stage 2 dementia. It painted a tragic picture of a once strong man who could no longer recognize his own family, a man who was a danger to himself and his finances. It was a masterpiece of legal fiction. I sat in my kitchen reading the lies my own daughter had signed her name to under penalty of perjury. She was willing to legally erase my existence to save a man who was drowning in gambling debts. I did not feel angry anymore. Anger is a hot emotion, and it burns out quickly. What I felt was absolute freezing cold. The hearing was scheduled for Monday morning in a private courtroom downtown. I wore my best tailored suit, the one I usually reserved for closing 9-figure commercial deals, but I purposely paired it with scuffed dress shoes and a slightly mismatched tie. I needed the judge to see exactly what Preston wanted him to see. A tired, declining old man. Victor met me in the hallway outside the courtroom. He carried his battered leather briefcase and wore a perfectly neutral expression. He handed me a single piece of paper to review. It was the financial trap we had spent the weekend building. I read it, nodded, and handed it back. We walked through the heavy wooden doors. Preston and Maya were already sitting at the petitioner table with a highly paid, aggressive-looking probate attorney. Maya wore a conservative, modest dress, clutching a tissue in her hand. She looked like the perfect, heartbroken daughter. Preston wore a sharp navy suit, sitting tall, trying to project the image of a responsible, capable son-in-law stepping up to carry the burden of the family. When I walked in, Preston locked eyes with me. A smug, victorious smirk flashed across his face for a fraction of a second before he replaced it with a look of deep, fake concern. He thought he had me cornered. He thought the legal system was a weapon only he knew how to use. The judge, an older, stern-looking man, reviewed the file in front of him. He looked down at the medical evaluation signed by the fake doctor. He sighed heavily, looking at me with eyes full of pity. It is a look I have seen powerful men give working-class men my entire life. A look that says they have already decided your worth before you even open your mouth. Mr. Carver, the judge began, his voice surprisingly gentle. Your family has presented a compelling and deeply concerning medical evaluation regarding your cognitive health. They are requesting temporary emergency control over your financial assets to ensure your bills are paid and your estate is not mismanaged during your decline. Does your legal counsel intend to contest this medical evaluation? Preston leaned forward, his eyes hungry. His lawyer sat ready, anticipating a long, brutal legal fight over the validity of the medical records. Victor stood up slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. He did not raise his voice. He spoke with the calm, measured tone of a man dropping a match into a pool of gasoline. Your Honor, Victor said, We do not contest the petition. In fact, Mr. Carver recognizes that managing his vast daily expenses has become overwhelmingly burdensome. We agree that his son-in-law, Preston Sterling, should be granted immediate conservatorship. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Preston's jaw literally dropped. Maya blinked, lowering the tissue from her dry eyes. Their aggressive lawyer looked confused, flipping through his notes as if he had missed a page. They came prepared for a war, and Victor had just handed them the keys to the castle without firing a single shot. However, Victor continued stepping out from behind our table. Because Mr. Carver's estate is highly complex, involving numerous commercial holdings that require specialized management, we propose a bifurcated conservatorship. We concede full legal control and guardianship over Mr. Carver's primary domestic checking account, which handles his personal liquid assets. This will allow Mr. Sterling to manage daily expenses, pay medical bills, and secure my client's immediate care, which is their stated primary concern. The judge nodded thoughtfully. That seems like a very reasonable and cooperative compromise. Mr. Sterling, are you amenable to this limited scope for the emergency period? Preston could barely contain his excitement. He thought he had just won the lottery. He assumed my primary domestic checking account was where I kept my life savings. He assumed it held hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars in liquid cash. He did not care about the commercial holdings because he needed cash today to pay off the mob and replace the embezzled hedge fund money. Yes, Your Honor, Preston said quickly, his voice tight with greed. We accept those terms. We just want to make sure Desmond is taken care of. The judge stamped the order. It was done. Preston Sterling was officially the legal conservator of my domestic checking account. As we walked out of the courthouse, Preston bumped his shoulder against mine. His fake concern was completely gone. He leaned in close to my ear. I told you, old man, Preston whispered. I always win. You should have just signed the papers in your kitchen. Now I own you. I looked at him, my expression perfectly blank. Enjoy the account, Preston, I said quietly. That night, Preston and Maya threw a lavish celebration party at their mansion, the same mansion that I now secretly owned the foreclosed debt on. My private investigator sent me photos from outside their gates. Caterers carried trays of expensive food. Luxury cars lined the heated driveway. Champagne flowed freely. Preston was likely telling his wealthy friends that he had just secured a massive inheritance, that he had brilliantly outmaneuvered his senile father-in-law, and that his financial troubles were permanently over. He was celebrating his own execution. I sat in Victor's high-rise office overlooking the glittering skyline of downtown Chicago. Victor poured 2 glasses of expensive, aged bourbon. He handed one to me and raised his glass in the air. To Preston Sterling. Victor said, a dark chuckle rumbling in his chest. A man who refuses to read the fine print. I took a sip of the bourbon. The burn felt good in the back of my throat. How long until the trap springs, Victor? Victor set his glass down on his mahogany desk and opened the file he had brought to court. When Preston took legal control of that specific domestic checking account, he assumed full fiduciary responsibility for it, Victor explained. He thinks he just gained access to your life savings. What he does not know is that you emptied that account yesterday. There is exactly $5,000 in it. I smiled, letting the warmth of the bourbon settle in my stomach, and the rest of it. Victor grinned, tapping the file. The rest of it is the masterpiece. That specific domestic account is legally tied as the primary guarantor to a defunct commercial shell company we set up 5 years ago. Yesterday, I filed amended tax returns for that shell company, claiming massive, deliberate deductions that automatically trigger a federal audit. That shell company now owes the Internal Revenue Service $4.2 million in back taxes and fraud penalties. By aggressively fighting to become the legal conservator of that exact account, Preston did not just win access to $5,000. He legally bound himself to the entity. He eagerly volunteered to assume personal liability for a $4 million federal tax fraud debt. Preston thought he had defeated me. He was drinking champagne in a house he was about to lose, celebrating his control over an account that was about to destroy him. He wanted my money to save him from the mob and his corporate auditors. Instead, he just handed his own head on a silver platter to the United States federal government. The Internal Revenue Service does not negotiate, they do not accept excuses, and they definitely do not care if you were trying to scam your father-in-law. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the jaws had snapped completely shut. Now it was time to watch him bleed. I am Desmond Carver, 74 years old, and I spent my entire life building an empire in the shadows. I always believed that blood was thicker than water, but I learned the hard way that blood means absolutely nothing when greed takes over. I was late for Thanksgiving dinner at my daughter's house. The freezing rain soaked my clothes as I stood on her porch, but when I looked through the glass door, I saw my son-in-law making a toast. He raised his crystal glass and said, "I hope the old man is gone for good. We are finally getting the house." My own daughter laughed along with their wealthy friends. I did not knock. I walked away. But when I got to my truck and checked my phone, I realized the betrayal was much worse. $80,000 had just been drained from my account. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The silence in my house felt different after Victor left. It was no longer the heavy, suffocating silence of an old man waiting to die. It was the sharp, charged silence of a loaded weapon. I walked into my living room and picked up a framed photograph from the mantel. It was a picture taken 22 years ago. I was standing on a dusty construction site on the south side of Chicago wearing a hard hat and holding a 10-year-old Maya in my arms. I looked at her bright, innocent smile in the photograph. I remembered that day perfectly. It was a sweltering July afternoon. I had made her sweep the entire ground floor of a commercial building before I handed her a crisp $10 bill. She had complained about the dust and the heat. I kneeled down, looked her in the eyes, and told her that $1 earned with your own sweat is $1 you will always respect. I told her that $1 stolen or given without effort is a curse that will eventually consume your soul. She hugged me that day and promised she would always work hard. I set the silver frame face down on the mantel. The little girl who swept that dusty floor was dead. The woman who took her place was a parasite who forged her father's name to save a husband who looked at her family like a bank account. I felt a brief hollow ache in my chest, a final mourning for the daughter I had lost. Then I buried it. My secure phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was Roxanne. I answered the call. "Tell me you have something good, Roxanne," I said, staring out the window at the dying afternoon light. "I have something devastating, Desmond," she replied, her voice crackling with the thrill of a hunter who just found a fresh trail of blood. I did not stop with the offshore trace and the hedge fund audit. I decided to clone Preston's personal phone and crack his private email server. If we are going to burn this man to the ground, I wanted to know exactly where every single stolen penny was going. I listened closely. The gambling debts to the Las Vegas mob were already documented. The missing millions from his corporate hedge fund were already known. What else could this man possibly be hiding? "Preston is not just a thief and a degenerate gambler," Roxanne continued, her tone turning sharp with disgust. "He is a textbook narcissist with a very expensive secret life. I found the lease agreement for a luxury penthouse in downtown Miami. It costs $12,000 a month. Preston signed the lease 3 years ago under a corporate shell name, but the utility bills are paid directly from the funds he embezzled." "Miami," I repeated, processing the information. "Does he use it as a getaway when he travels for business?" "No," Desmond, Roxanne said flatly. "He does not use it as a getaway. He uses it to house his mistress." The words hung in the air. "I pulled up the security camera feeds from the building lobby," Roxanne explained. "Her name is Chloe. She is 22 years old, a white blonde aspiring model who is exactly 10 years younger than your daughter. Preston has been funding her entire lifestyle. Designer handbags, first-class flights, expensive jewelry. He is draining the money he stole from Maya's forged mortgage and your emergency account to keep this girl living like royalty while his actual wife is weeks away from being thrown out on the street." A dark, bitter laugh escaped my lips. It was almost poetic. Maya had sold her soul, betrayed her own father, and risked federal prison to save a man who was using her stolen money to finance a secret life with a woman 10 years her junior. Maya thought she was the clever mastermind plotting my demise in the shadows. She had no idea she was nothing but a useful idiot to her own husband. "Send me everything I commanded. The lease agreement, the bank transfers, and the highest resolution photographs you have from those security cameras. I want undeniable proof." "I will have the encrypted file in your inbox in 60 seconds, Roxanne said. "Desmond, what are you going to do with this? If you give this to the divorce lawyers, Maya could use it to claim she is a victim of his financial abuse." I walked over to my desk and opened my laptop. "Maya is not a victim, Roxanne. She forged my signature on $1 million document. She brought a fake doctor into my home to declare me insane. She is a co-conspirator, but right now they are united. They are fighting together against the walls closing in on them. If I want to completely destroy them, I need to break their alliance. I need them to turn on each other like starving wolves in a cage. I opened the encrypted email Roxanne sent. The attachments were crystal clear. High-definition photos of Preston walking into the Miami luxury building, his arm wrapped tightly around the waist of a tall, beautiful blonde woman. Photos of them kissing by a private pool. Digital receipts for $50,000 diamond necklaces and weekly wire transfers for her personal allowance. I sat back and looked at the screen. This was the ultimate trump card. I could take this to the police, I could take this to the bank. But that would not inflict the maximum amount of psychological damage. I opened a new untraceable email account using a virtual private network. I left the subject line completely blank. I attached the lease agreement, the jewelry receipts, and 5 of the most damning photographs of Preston and Chloe. I typed in Maya's personal email address, the one she checked constantly on her phone. I did not write a long, gloating message. I did not reveal my identity. I simply typed one single sentence in the body of the email. This is what your father's money is paying for. I hovered my finger over the mouse pad. In a few hours, Preston would be walking through the front door of their soon-to-be-foreclosed mansion. He would likely pour himself a glass of expensive scotch, still celebrating his supposed legal victory over my bank account. He would look at Maya and tell her that everything was going to be fine. I pressed send. The email vanished into the digital ether, flying silently through the city, heading straight for my daughter's phone. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. The trap was set. The financial snare was already tightening around Preston's neck, and now the emotional explosive had just been dropped right into the center of their marriage. I did not know if Maya would confront him immediately, or if she would try to use it to her own advantage. But I knew one thing for absolute certain. There is no wrath on this earth quite like a greedy, arrogant woman who realizes she has been played for a fool. I stood up and walked into the kitchen to pour myself another cup of coffee. It was going to be a very long, very entertaining night. I did not have to wait long to see the results of my digital explosive. Roxanne is a woman of many terrifying talents, and hacking into a residential smart home system is child's play for someone with her security clearances. While Preston and Maya believed they lived in a private, secure fortress, Roxanne had seamlessly tapped into their high-end security cameras and the voice-activated assistant speakers placed in every room of their mansion. I sat in the dark of my kitchen, a single wireless earbud resting in my right ear. The audio feed was crystal clear. I could hear the faint hum of their central heating system. I could hear the clinking of ice in a glass. And then I heard the heavy oak front door swing open. Preston was home. "Maya, I am back," Preston called out. His voice was lighter, artificially elevated. He was probably riding the high of his supposed legal victory in the courtroom earlier that morning. "I picked up some sushi from that place you like. Where are you?" There was no verbal response. Just the sound of slow, heavy footsteps clicking against the marble floor of their grand foyer. I listened closely, staring at the blank wall of my kitchen. "What is wrong with you?" Preston asked, his confident tone faltering instantly. "Why are you looking at me like that?" The explosion happened with zero warning. A heavy glass object, likely a vase or a framed photograph, shattered violently against a wall, missing Preston by mere inches. I heard him shout in shock, followed by the sound of him scrambling backward. "Are you out of your mind?" Preston yelled. "What is wrong with you?" "Who is Chloe?" Maya screamed. Her voice was not just angry. It was guttural, raw, and completely unhinged. The sound echoed through the audio feed, piercing my ear. "Who is the 22-year-old blonde model living in a $12,000 a month penthouse in Miami, Preston?" There was a dead, suffocating silence on the feed. I could almost picture the blood draining from Preston's arrogant face. The sushi container probably hit the floor. He was caught. "Maya, listen to me." Preston started, his voice instantly dropping into a panicked, placating stammer. "I do not know what you are talking about. Someone is trying to mess with us. Someone sent you a fake email. It is a scam. Do not you dare lie to me," she shrieked, her voice cracking with absolute hysteria. "I saw the lease agreement. I saw the wire transfers. I saw the security footage of you kissing her by the pool. You told me you were in Florida securing a commercial real estate backer. You were funding a mistress with my father's money. You stole from my family to buy diamonds for a child. The desperation in Preston's voice vanished. When a narcissist is backed into a corner and their lies no longer work, they do not apologize, they attack. Your family. Preston spat, his tone turning vicious and cruel. Do not stand there and act like some innocent victim, Maya. Your family has nothing. Your father is a broke, pathetic bricklayer who is losing his mind. The only reason we are surviving right now is because I am breaking my back trying to fix this financial nightmare. You stole $80,000 from his emergency account, Maya fired back, her voice shaking with rage. You told me you needed it to pay off the auditors. You told me it would keep you out of federal prison, and you spent it on her. You are a liar and a cheat. I am divorcing you. I am calling my lawyer right now, and I am taking everything. I sat in the dark listening to my daughter threaten to end her marriage. A tiny foolish part of me, the father who still remembered carrying her on his shoulders, hoped she would walk out that door. I hoped the betrayal would wake her up. I hoped she would realize the monster she married, pack her bags, and come back to me asking for forgiveness. But Preston knew exactly how to play her. Take what Preston laughed, a cold, mocking sound that chilled the air. Take the house. The house is foreclosed, Maya. The bank is seizing it on Christmas Day. Take my accounts. My accounts are frozen by the hedge fund auditors. You want to divorce me? Go ahead. But let me remind you of one very important detail, sweetheart. The audio feed picked up the sound of Preston taking slow, deliberate steps toward her. You forged your father's signature on the commercial mortgage, Preston whispered, his voice dripping with venomous leverage. You took the pen, you practiced his handwriting, and you signed the document that defrauded the bank out of $1.5 million. If I go down for embezzlement, you go down for federal bank fraud and identity theft. You will not be a wealthy divorcee. You will be an inmate in a federal penitentiary. I closed my eyes. The silence that followed his threat was heavier than lead. Maya was trapped, and she knew it. Preston had systematically dismantled her moral high ground in less than 60 seconds. We are bankrupt, Maya, Preston continued, his tone softening, shifting from a threat to a toxic, manipulative plea. We have absolutely nothing left. The mob wants my head. The federal government wants my freedom. We are standing on the edge of a cliff, but we still have one parachute. Your father. Do not talk about my father, Maya whispered, but the fight had already left her voice. It was replaced by a trembling, terrified realization of her own guilt. I have to talk about him, Preston insisted. We have temporary conservatorship over his checking account, but that is not enough. We need full legal guardianship over his entire estate. The court hearing for the permanent order is in 2 weeks. If we get that, we can force him into a state-run psychiatric facility. We can legally liquidate his house, his truck, and any secret pensions he has buried away. We take the cash, we pay off the mortgage, we silence the auditors, and we start over. You are asking me to lock my father away in an asylum, she said. I am asking you to save your own life, Preston replied. He is old, Maya. He is useless. He has lived his life. Do you really want to spend the next 10 years in a concrete cell because you were too sentimental about a man who cannot even remember the day of the week? I held my breath. I waited in the dark kitchen, the earbud pressing into my ear. This was the moment. This was the ultimate test of my daughter's soul. She had just discovered her husband was a cheating, lying thief who had squandered their entire fortune. He was offering her a choice: turn him in and face the consequences of her own forgery, or sacrifice her father to buy her freedom and maintain her luxurious lifestyle. If we do this, Maya said, her voice completely devoid of emotion, if I help you put him in a facility and drain his assets, we will be free, Preston promised quickly. If we do this, Maya repeated, her tone turning ice cold, I want total, undisputed control of the liquidated funds. You do not touch a single dime without my approval. And the girl in Miami is gone. You cut the lease, you cut the wire transfers, and she never exists again. Or I will gladly go to federal prison just to watch you burn next to me. Preston let out a breath of relief. Done. She means nothing to me. We are a team, Maya. We survive this together. I reached up and pulled the wireless earbud out of my ear. I placed it gently on the kitchen table. the silence of my house wrapped around me like a thick, heavy blanket. I did not feel sad. I did not feel angry. I felt absolutely nothing. The last remaining drop of fatherly compassion I held in my heart evaporated into thin air. The woman on the other end of that audio feed was not my daughter. She was a parasite. She was a ruthless, calculating stranger who was willing to lock the man who raised her in a psychiatric ward just to keep a cheating husband and a stolen mansion. They had made their final choice. They had sealed a pact over my supposed grave. I stood up from the kitchen table. My joints did not ache. My back was not hunched. I walked over to the large bay window and looked out at the streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement. They wanted to play a game of survival. They wanted to strip me down to the bone and throw me to the wolves, but they were fighting a man they did not understand. They were fighting a ghost who held the deeds to their entire existence. I pulled my secure phone from my pocket and dialed Victor's number. It was late, but I knew he would answer. "Victor," I said, my voice echoing in the empty house. "I am here," Desmond, Victor replied. "The grace period is over," I commanded. "I want the hammer to fall, accelerate the eviction process on the mansion. I do not want to wait until Christmas. I want them thrown out in the cold. And contact Roxanne. Tell her to prepare the corporate traps. Consider them destroyed," Victor said and hung up the phone. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. The old fragile father they thought they were manipulating was dead. Desmond Carver, the ruthless architect of a commercial empire, was fully awake. I was going to crush them until there was nothing left but dust. I am Desmond Carver, 74 years old, and I spent my entire life building an empire in the shadows. I always believed that blood was thicker than water, but I learned the hard way that blood means absolutely nothing when greed takes over. I was late for Thanksgiving dinner at my daughter's house. The freezing rain soaked my clothes as I stood on her porch. But when I looked through the glass door, I saw my son-in-law making a toast. He raised his crystal glass and said, "I hope the old man is gone for good. We are finally getting the house." My own daughter laughed along with their wealthy friends. I did not knock. I walked away. But when I got to my truck and checked my phone, I realized the betrayal was much worse. $80,000 had just been drained from my account. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Preston thought he had outsmarted me in probate court, but he severely underestimated the architecture of true wealth. The temporary conservatorship only gave him access to a drained checking account carrying a $4 million tax bomb. He still needed real capital. He needed to liquidate my major commercial assets to save himself from his hedge fund auditors and his violent gambling creditors. But when his aggressive lawyers finally dug into my property records, they hit a reinforced steel wall. My real wealth is protected by an ironclad family trust. I structured it decades ago with a very specific old-school contingency. No property within the trust can be sold, leveraged, or transferred without the physical impression of the original corporate seal. A piece of paper with a signature is not enough. A judge's order is not enough. The trust requires the heavy metal stamp that I keep hidden away. Without that physical seal, the entire empire is completely locked down. Preston realized he was trapped. He could not wait months for a full legal battle to dismantle the trust. The bank was foreclosing on his mansion by Christmas. His investors were demanding their missing millions. Desperation makes a man abandon logic and embrace pure criminality. If he could not get the money through the courtroom, he was going to get it by force. He was going to send someone to tear my house apart to find that seal or any master documents he could leverage immediately. I knew he was coming. I did not buy extra locks. I did not hire private security. I simply prepared the bait. On a quiet Tuesday evening, I sat in my home office and arranged the perfect trap. I walked over to the heavy iron safe in the corner of the room. I intentionally left the thick metal door open just a fraction of an inch, the kind of careless mistake a man suffering from dementia might make. Inside, I placed outdated tax returns, expired insurance policies, and useless property deeds. But the real prize was not inside the safe. It was sitting directly in the center of my polished mahogany desk. It was a thick premium leather dossier. I had printed and bound it myself that very afternoon. The gold lettering on the cover read, "Apex Horizon Commercial Development Master Plan." To a desperate finance broker, it looked like a multi-million-dollar real estate blueprint. It looked like absolute salvation. Let me tell you about the property detailed in that folder. 15 years ago, I bought an abandoned, rotting industrial chemical site on the desolate outskirts of the city. I bought it for pennies. It is officially classified by the government as a toxic brownfield. The soil is contaminated with heavy metals. It is completely worthless, legally undevelopable, and practically radioactive. But in that leather dossier, I completely altered reality. I swapped the geological surveys with clean soil reports. I replaced the strict zoning laws with fake municipal development approvals. I manufactured flawless financial projections. In that folder, the toxic chemical dump was presented as a fully approved shovel-ready site for a massive luxury shopping center. The fabricated documents projected a guaranteed return of $20 million within a 6-month window. It was a beautiful, flawless, shiny mirage. Midnight arrived. The neighborhood was dead quiet. I turned off every light in the house. I did not go to sleep. I sat in my worn armchair in the darkest corner of the living room, completely swallowed by the shadows. I held my digital tablet in my hands, the screen dimmed to the absolute lowest setting, watching the infrared feeds from the hidden security cameras I had installed the day before. At exactly 2 in the morning, a large shadow moved across my backyard. Preston did not have the courage to come himself. He was a coward who hired others to do his dirty work. A tall, muscular man wearing a black hoodie and a dark face mask stepped onto my back porch. He was not a random street thief. He moved with purpose. He bypassed the alarm sensor and picked the lock on my back door in less than 30 seconds. I sat perfectly still. My breathing was slow and steady. A younger man might have confronted the intruder with a baseball bat. A scared man might have locked himself in the bathroom and called the police. But I am a veteran of the business world, and I was simply watching my foundation set. The thief slipped into my kitchen. His flashlight cast a narrow, pale beam across the hardwood floor. He walked right past my expensive flat-screen television. He ignored the silver in the dining room. He had specific orders. He moved silently down the hallway and pushed open the door to my study. On my tablet screen, I watched him shine his light on the heavy iron safe. He grabbed the handle, clearly surprised to find it already unlocked. He aggressively rummaged through the old tax returns and useless deeds I had left inside. He tossed them onto the floor in frustration. He found nothing of value. Then his flashlight beam swept across the top of my desk. It landed on the leather dossier. The thief approached the desk and flipped the folder open. He pulled out his cellular phone, snapped a quick photograph of the first page showing the massive $20 million projection, and sent it to someone. A minute later, his phone buzzed with a reply. The thug immediately grabbed the entire dossier, shoved it deep into his black backpack, and turned around. He quietly walked back down the hallway, stepped out the back door, and vanished into the cold night. The entire break-in lasted less than 8 minutes. The back door clicked shut. The house was empty again. I did not dial emergency services. I did not shout. I simply reached over and turned on the small reading lamp next to my chair. The bait had been swallowed whole. I picked up my secure phone and called Roxanne. She answered on the first ring, completely alert. "The package has been successfully delivered," I told her, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet living room. Roxanne let out a low, deeply satisfied laugh. "Preston just received the dossier," she confirmed. "I have been monitoring his digital traffic. He thinks he just struck gold. He thinks he stole the master blueprint to your most lucrative, highly classified project. He thinks this is his ticket out of hell." I leaned back in my chair and explained the true beauty of the trap. "Preston is a drowning man, Roxanne. He is millions of dollars in the hole. He cannot wait for a judge to finalize a conservatorship to sell my actual properties. He needs liquid cash this exact week. What does a corrupt hedge fund manager do when he holds a shiny, guaranteed $20 million investment plan in his hands? He sells it to his clients," Roxanne whispered, realizing the sheer magnitude of the trap. "Exactly," I replied. "He will take my fake dossier directly to the wealthiest, most aggressive investors in his hedge fund. He will pitch them the luxury shopping center, claiming it is his own exclusive side project. He will collect millions in advance capital from those investors to secretly cover the money he already embezzled. By sending a thug to steal that folder, Preston thought he was robbing an old man, but I had just handed him a loaded weapon and he was pointing it directly at his own chest. The moment Preston solicits investment money using those fabricated documents, he permanently elevates his crime. He crosses the line from simple corporate theft into massive federal wire fraud and interstate securities fraud. He is going to scam the most powerful litigious investors in the city using a toxic garbage dump as his collateral. He thinks he is brilliantly spinning his way out of debt. He thinks he finally beat me. But he just tied a federal legal noose around his own neck and he is about to kick away the chair. The stage was now perfectly set for his spectacular, highly public execution. Winter hit Chicago with a brutal and blinding snowstorm just days before Christmas. The city was buried under a thick layer of white, freezing everything in its path. But the cold outside was absolutely nothing compared to the absolute zero temperature of my heart. Preston was moving exactly as Roxanne and I had predicted. The stolen dossier was burning a hole in his greedy hands, and his desperation had reached its absolute peak. He needed to convert that fake commercial blueprint into liquid cash immediately to satisfy the hedge fund auditors and cover his tracks. To do that, he needed an audience. He needed victims. Roxanne called me early that morning. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the silence of my kitchen. "Desmond," she said, "Preston has rented out the grand ballroom at the Sterling Plaza Hotel for tonight. He is throwing a massive black-tie Christmas gala. He has invited the wealthiest, most aggressive private investors in his entire corporate network. He is using the party as a front to pitch your fabricated luxury shopping center project. He is asking for minimum buy-ins of $500,000 per person." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "He is speeding up his own execution," I replied. "He is absolutely frantic," Roxanne confirmed. "The bank foreclosure on their mansion becomes final in exactly 3 days. He is hoping to collect millions in advance capital tonight, skim what he needs to save his house and pay back the hedge fund, and use the rest to run the fake development scam for as long as he can. He is building a massive house of cards." Just as I hung up with Roxanne, my phone vibrated again. It was Maya. I stared at the screen, feeling a deep, familiar disgust rising in my throat. I answered the call intentionally, letting my voice sound weak and confused. "Hi, Daddy," Maya said, her voice unnaturally bright and cheerful. "Preston and I are hosting a beautiful Christmas party tonight. We really want you to be there. We want to celebrate as a family." I played my part perfectly. "A party," I stammered. "Maya, you know I do not like big crowds anymore. The noise makes my head hurt. And I do not have anything nice to wear to a fancy hotel." Her response was swift, and the sheer calculation behind her words made my stomach turn. "Do not worry about a suit, Daddy," she insisted. "We want you to be comfortable. Just wear your old work clothes, your faded flannel shirt, and those comfortable boots you always wear. Everyone knows you are a retired builder. They will think it is sweet. We just want you there in spirit. We are even sending a private car to pick you up so you do not have to drive in the snow." I ended the call and set the phone down on the table. The level of depravity was staggering. My own daughter was orchestrating a public humiliation. She did not want me there to celebrate the holidays. She and Preston wanted to parade me in front of their wealthy investors as a pathetic, senile charity case. Preston was going to stand on a stage point to the poor, confused old black man in the worn-out flannel shirt and tell a heartbreaking story. He was going to claim he was selflessly stepping up to manage my legacy because I was losing my mind. He was going to use my supposed fragility to gain sympathy, build trust with the investors, and legitimize his massive fraud. They wanted a prop, a human shield, to make their lies look noble and heroic. I walked down the hallway to my bedroom. I opened my large walk-in closet. On the right side hung 5 custom-tailored Italian suits, garments that commanded immediate respect in any corporate boardroom in the country. I ignored them. I reached to the far left and pulled out an old faded red flannel shirt and a pair of scuffed, dirt-stained work pants. I put them on slowly. I laced up my worn-out construction boots, the exact same boots I used to wear when I was pouring concrete in the freezing rain to pay for Maya's expensive private college tuition. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. I looked exactly like the broken, exhausted old man they wanted me to be. A man who had nothing left to offer the world. A man who was ready to be locked away in a forgotten nursing home. But my eyes told a completely different story. My eyes were sharp, cold, and utterly merciless. I walked over to my desk and opened the top drawer. I bypassed the pens and the spare keys. I reached into the back and pulled out a small, heavy black USB drive. This tiny piece of metal did not look like much, but it was a weapon of mass destruction. Inside its encrypted memory was the sum total of Preston and Maya's criminal existence. It held the high-resolution photographs of Preston kissing his 22-year-old mistress by the pool in Miami. It held the offshore bank traces of the $80,000 they stole from my emergency account on Thanksgiving night. It held the clear audio recording of Preston bribing a fake doctor with $10,000 to declare me legally insane. It held the banking records of the forged commercial mortgage Maya signed. It held the federal tax lien that Preston blindly assumed when he aggressively took over my empty checking account. And most importantly, it held the official Environmental Protection Agency documents proving that the $20 million commercial project Preston was pitching tonight was actually a highly toxic radioactive chemical dump. I gripped the USB drive tightly in my palm. The metal felt cold and heavy against my skin. I slipped it deep into the breast pocket of my faded flannel shirt right next to my beating heart. At exactly 7 o'clock, bright headlights pierced the falling snow outside my front window. A massive, sleek black limousine pulled up to the curb, idling loudly in the quiet suburban neighborhood. I put on my heavy winter coat, pulled a simple wool cap over my head, and stepped out onto the porch. The freezing wind immediately bit at my face, but I did not shiver. I walked down the snowy path toward the waiting vehicle. The driver, a young man in a crisp black suit, stepped out and opened the rear door for me. He took one look at my faded work clothes, my scuffed boots, and my old coat. I could see the immediate judgment flash across his face. He thought I was the hired help or some charity case being dragged along to a corporate function out of pity. He did not say a single word, barely concealing his disdain, as I climbed into the luxurious leather-scented cabin of the limousine. The heavy door clicked shut, sealing me inside the quiet, climate-controlled interior. The dark privacy glass separated me from the driver. I sat alone in the back, surrounded by plush leather and soft neon lighting. The limousine slowly pulled away from my house, beginning the long, smooth drive toward the downtown hotel. I looked out the tinted window at the passing city. The snow was falling harder now, covering the streets and the buildings in a thick white blanket. People were hurrying along the sidewalks, carrying shopping bags, preparing for a joyful Christmas with their families. I was preparing for a funeral. I thought about the city I was riding through. I had helped build these streets. I had poured the foundations for these high-rises. I had earned every single brick of my empire through honest, back-breaking labor. Maya grew up eating the fruits of that labor, and she repaid me by trying to forge my signature and lock me in an asylum. A father has to kill a part of his own soul to destroy his child. I had spent the last few weeks mourning that loss, but tonight there was no more sadness left in my body. There was only a profound, terrifying calm. They thought they had won. They were currently standing in a grand ballroom drinking expensive champagne, smiling at wealthy investors, completely convinced that their brilliant, ruthless plan had succeeded. They thought the old man was arriving to play his final pathetic role before being discarded forever into the shadows. I rested my hand over my chest, feeling the solid shape of the black USB drive through the fabric of my coat. They sent a limousine to bring a helpless victim to the slaughterhouse. They had no idea they had just sent a luxury chariot to pick up the grim reaper. The ride was smooth, silent, and inevitable. I closed my eyes and waited for the show to begin. I am Desmond Carver, 74 years old, and I spent my entire life building an empire in the shadows. I always believed that blood was thicker than water, but I learned the hard way that blood means absolutely nothing when greed takes over. I was late for Thanksgiving dinner at my daughter's house. The freezing rain soaked my clothes as I stood on her porch. But when I looked through the glass door, I saw my son-in-law making a toast. He raised his crystal glass and said, "I hope the old man is gone for good. We are finally getting the house." My own daughter laughed along with their wealthy friends. I did not knock. I walked away. But when I got to my truck and checked my phone, I realized the betrayal was much worse. $80,000 had just been drained from my account. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The limousine glided to a smooth stop in front of the Sterling Plaza Hotel. The snow was falling heavily now, but the massive entrance to the hotel was a fortress of warmth and blinding light. Valets in crisp white uniforms rushed to open the doors of arriving luxury vehicles. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in sparkling evening gowns stepped out onto the red carpet laughing and shielding themselves from the bitter winter wind. This was the absolute peak of Chicago high society. These were the multi-millionaires, the powerful hedge fund managers, and the aggressive venture capitalists. This was Preston's hunting ground. The driver opened my door. I stepped out into the freezing night air. I did not wear a tuxedo. I wore my faded red flannel shirt, my heavy scuffed construction boots, and a worn-out winter coat that had seen a decade of hard labor. The contrast was immediate and jarring. As I walked up the red carpet, the wealthy guests stopped and stared. I could see the confusion and the disdain wrinkling their perfectly manicured faces. They whispered behind their hands. They pointed discreetly. They wondered how a tired, poor old black man had wandered into their exclusive invitation-only event. They looked at me like I was a lost beggar who had stumbled in from the freezing streets. They had no idea that I could buy the entire hotel they were standing in with a single phone call. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and handed my wet coat to the stunned coat check attendant. I walked into the grand ballroom. The sheer opulence of the event was sickening. There were massive ice sculptures carved into the shape of dollar signs. Waiters in black ties balanced silver trays loaded with champagne glasses and expensive caviar. A live jazz band played softly in the corner, providing a sophisticated soundtrack to Preston's massive fraud. I shuffled my feet, keeping my head slightly bowed, playing the role of the confused, declining father-in-law to absolute perfection. I let my hand shake slightly as I walked through the crowd. The wealthy elite parted for me like Moses parting the Red Sea, completely desperate to avoid touching my dirty clothes. From across the massive room I spotted them. Preston and Maya were holding court near the center stage. Maya was wearing a stunning floor-length emerald gown that probably cost more than most people make in a year. A diamond necklace sparkled against her skin, paid for by the money she helped steal from my emergency account. Preston stood beside her wearing a custom velvet tuxedo, holding a glass of champagne and laughing loudly at a joke made by a prominent real estate investor. Preston looked up and saw me. A flash of pure malicious triumph crossed his face. He quickly leaned down and whispered something into Maya's ear. She turned, saw my shabby clothes, and a look of deep, arrogant satisfaction settled into her features. They thought I was completely broken. They thought I was a pathetic, docile animal being led to the slaughter. Preston handed his champagne glass to a passing waiter and rushed toward me, cutting through the crowd. Maya followed closely behind him. "Desmond, you made it!" Preston announced, his voice booming artificially loud so that the surrounding investors could hear him. He threw his arms around me in a tight, suffocating hug. "I am so glad you are here. We were getting worried about you wandering around in the cold." Daddy Maya chimed in, placing a delicate hand on my shoulder. She looked at me with eyes full of fake, tragic pity. "You look so tired. Come, let us get you a seat near the front. We are about to make the big announcement." I did not speak. I simply nodded slowly, letting my eyes wander around the room as if the bright lights were confusing my fragile brain. Preston wrapped his arm around my shoulder and guided me through the crowd of billionaires and bankers. People looked at us with sympathetic smiles. They saw a brilliant, compassionate young finance executive taking tender care of his sick blue-collar father-in-law. The manipulation was masterful. Preston led me right up to the front of the stage. He patted my back one last time, gave the crowd a humble, heroic smile, and then walked up the short flight of stairs to the podium. The jazz band stopped playing. The room fell into a quiet, respectful silence. Preston tapped the microphone twice. The sound echoed through the grand ballroom. He looked out over the sea of wealthy faces, his chest puffed out with absolute arrogance. "Ladies and gentlemen," Preston began, his voice smooth and incredibly persuasive, "I want to thank you all for coming tonight. We are here to celebrate the holidays, but more importantly, we are here to celebrate the future. We are here to unveil a $20 million commercial development project that will completely change the landscape of this city." The crowd clapped politely. Preston raised his hands, asking for quiet. He let his face drop into an expression of deep emotional sorrow. "But before we talk about the future, I need to talk about legacy." Preston continued, his voice cracking perfectly with fake emotion. He gestured down to where I was standing. "Many of you know my father-in-law, Desmond Carver. Desmond is a builder. He worked with his hands his entire life to provide for his family. He is a man of pride and hard work. Preston paused, reaching up to wipe a non-existent tear from his eye. The audience murmured in collective sympathy. "Unfortunately, life is not always fair," Preston said, his voice dropping to a tragic whisper. "My dear father-in-law is currently battling a severe rapid cognitive decline. He is losing his memory. He is losing his grip on reality. It has been the hardest challenge my wife and I have ever faced. But it has also taught us about duty. As Desmond's mind fades, I have had to step up. I have had to take the reins of his life and his legacy. I am carrying this empire on my shoulders now because he no longer can. This new project tonight is for him." The entire ballroom erupted into applause. Some of the wealthy women in the front row actually had tears in their eyes. They were completely sold. They thought Preston was a saint. Preston looked down at me, a vicious, mocking sneer hidden behind his sympathetic smile. He gestured for me to come up to the stage. "Come up here, Desmond." Preston coaxed gently into the microphone. "Come stand by me." I slowly walked up the stairs. I dragged my boots heavily against the wood. I reached the podium and stood next to the man who was actively trying to destroy my existence. The crowd clapped louder, honoring the tragic, broken old man. Preston put his hand on my shoulder, leaning into the microphone. "Let us give a round of applause for a man who gave everything and now needs us to give back to him." The applause reached a crescendo, and then the play was over. I did not slowly turn my head. I did not tremble. I stood up perfectly straight. The hunch in my spine vanished instantly. My shoulders broadened. The fragile, cloudy look in my eyes evaporated, replaced by a dark, terrifying intensity. The physical transformation was so sudden and so absolute that Preston actually took a startled step backward. I reached out and grabbed the microphone stand. My grip was like iron. I ripped the microphone right out of Preston's hand. He tried to hold on to it, but my physical strength completely overpowered him. He stared at me, his eyes widening in sudden, unadulterated panic. I turned to face the crowd of investors. The applause died down into a confused, nervous silence. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop on the carpet. I brought the microphone to my lips. My voice did not shake. It boomed through the ballroom speakers, deep, resonant, and overflowing with absolute authority. "My son-in-law is right," I announced, staring directly into the terrified eyes of the wealthiest men in the city. I have lost my memory. I turned my head slowly and locked eyes with Preston. His face was completely drained of color. He looked like he had just seen a ghost rise from the grave. I lost my memory so much I continued, my voice echoing like thunder, that I completely forgot that the $2 million mansion he is sleeping in is a property that I paid for in cash. A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. The silence shattered. The elite crowd began to murmur loudly, shifting in their expensive suits and gowns. The wealthy investors exchanged bewildered, alarmed glances. I leaned closer to the microphone, keeping my eyes fixed on my trembling son-in-law. I forgot that I owned the roof over his head. I forgot that I owned the very ground he walks on. But worst of all, Preston, I forgot to tell you that you invited the wrong man to your execution. Before Preston could even close his gaping mouth, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the grand ballroom swung open. Through the sea of frozen, terrified billionaires, my attorney Victor walked with the calm, measured pace of an executioner. He did not look at the glittering ice sculptures or the trays of expensive champagne. His eyes were locked on the audio-visual control booth positioned just to the side of the main stage. I reached into the breast pocket of my faded flannel shirt, pulling out the heavy black digital drive. I tossed it through the air. It landed perfectly in Victor's outstretched hand. Without a single word, Victor stepped up to the control booth. He pushed the terrified sound technician out of the way and plugged the drive directly into the master projection system. Preston finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. His eyes darted from me to Victor, and then to the massive wall-sized screen dropping down slowly behind the podium. He knew exactly what was happening. The illusion was breaking. The velvet curtain was being ripped down, exposing the ugly, rotting truth behind his perfect life. "Desmond, what are you doing?" Preston hissed, stepping toward me with his hands raised, trying to block the microphone. "Turn that off right now. You are making a scene. You are confused. Let me help you off the stage." I did not move an inch. I looked at him with eyes so devoid of mercy that he physically recoiled. "I am not confused, Preston," I said, my voice projecting loud and clear through the ballroom speakers. "I have never been more lucid in my entire life." The massive screen behind us flashed a brilliant, blinding white. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd of wealthy investors as the first image appeared. It was not a rendering of a luxury shopping center. It was a high-resolution, unredacted bank statement from my emergency joint checking account. I pointed at the giant screen behind me. "Look closely, ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the crowd. "This is the man you are about to hand your millions to. This is Preston Sterling, the brilliant hedge fund manager. Notice the timestamp on that wire transfer. $80,000 drained from a locked emergency account. That transaction took place at exactly 8 o'clock on Thanksgiving night, right while he was sitting at his grand dining table drinking wine and raising a toast to my impending death." The ballroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of gasps and outraged whispers. These were ruthless business people. They understood greed. But stealing liquid cash from your own elderly family member on a holiday is not just greedy. It is the action of a desperate drowning man. And in the world of high finance, desperation is highly contagious. No one wants to invest with a man who is secretly broke. Preston turned completely white. Sweat poured down his forehead, ruining his perfectly styled hair. He grabbed the edges of the podium, his knuckles turning pure white. "It is a forgery!" Preston shouted into the microphone, his voice cracking with panic. "He is a sick old man. His mind is gone. He fabricated that document. Do not look at it." Victor did not even blink. He simply clicked his mouse. The screen went black. A large audio waveform appeared in the center of the display. "Let us see if your own voice is a forgery, Preston," I said coldly. The speakers above us crackled to life. The audio was crystal clear, captured perfectly by the hidden recorder in my pocket from the day he brought the fake doctor to my living room. Preston's arrogant, venomous voice bounced off the crystal chandeliers and echoed through the silent, horrified ballroom. "I do not pay you to give me medical opinions. I pay you to write the prescription I need. Put it in the official file that he has stage 2 dementia and is no longer fit to manage his own affairs. Sign the evaluation, and I will transfer the remaining $10,000 to your account tonight. Just get it done." Then the nervous, sweating voice of the fake doctor replied, "Understood. The paperwork will be ready by tomorrow morning." The recording stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than a concrete slab. 100 of the most powerful people in Chicago just listened to Preston Sterling confess to medical fraud, bribery, and an attempted illegal conservatorship. They just listened to him plot to lock an innocent man in a psychiatric ward just to steal his assets. Preston's eyes were wild, darting frantically around the room. He looked at the faces of his wealthy clients. The people who were supposed to write him massive checks tonight were now staring at him with absolute, undisguised disgust. He saw investors whispering to their spouses. He saw men pulling out their phones to cancel pending transactions. His entire corporate reputation was burning to ash right in front of his eyes. The survival instinct of a cornered rat finally kicked in. Logic vanished completely. He let out a feral, desperate scream and lunged toward the audiovisual booth. He was going to rip the cables out of the wall. He was going to smash the computer. He was going to destroy the evidence by pure brute force. He did not make it 2 steps. I did not come to this execution unprotected. 2 massive men in tailored black suits stepped out from the shadows near the edge of the stage. I had hired them earlier that afternoon from the most elite private security firm in the state. Before Preston could even reach the wires, the first bodyguard moved with terrifying speed. He grabbed Preston by the collar of his expensive velvet tuxedo and the belt of his trousers. With a single fluid motion, the bodyguard lifted the 35-year-old hedge fund manager completely off his feet and slammed him violently onto the hard wooden floor of the stage. The impact echoed like a gunshot. Preston gasped, all the air rushing out of his lungs. The second bodyguard stepped forward, placing a heavy, polished leather shoe firmly between Preston's shoulder blades, pinning him flat against the floor. Preston struggled, kicking his legs and flailing his arms like a pathetic, helpless child, but he could not move an inch. "Stop it! Leave him alone!" A shrill, hysterical voice pierced the air. Maya rushed up the stairs of the stage, her emerald gown trailing behind her. Her face was contorted in absolute panic. She dropped to her knees next to her pinned husband, grabbing the bodyguard's arm, but he did not even flinch. She stood up and turned to the crowd, her eyes wide and manic. She grabbed the microphone I had left on the podium. "Do not listen to him," Maya screamed at the horrified investors. "My father is completely delusional. He is sick. He is suffering from severe dementia. He made all of this up to ruin us. He is out of his mind. He belongs in a hospital." I looked at the little girl I had raised. I looked at the woman who had forged my signature to steal my property, the woman who had agreed to lock me in an asylum so she could keep her cheating husband and her luxury cars. She was crying real tears now, but they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of a parasite realizing the host had just cut off the life supply. I stepped slowly toward her. I did not look sick. I did not look confused. I looked like a towering force of absolute authority. I reached out and took the microphone from her trembling hands. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand. "I am not crazy, Maya," I said, my voice deadly calm, broadcasting to every corner of the room. "And I am not the one who is going to need a lawyer by the end of this night." I turned back to Victor in the control booth and gave him a single nod. The warm-up act was over. It was time to show these investors what Preston was really trying to sell them. It was time to trigger the federal trap. I turned away from my trembling daughter and looked back out at the sea of wealthy investors. They were absolutely silent. The jazz band had fled the stage. The waiters had frozen in place. Everyone was watching a Greek tragedy unfold in real time. I gave Victor another nod. The massive screen behind me clicked again. The audio waveform disappeared, replaced by a scanned image of a very official-looking legal document. It was a commercial mortgage agreement. "Let me tell you a story about a father's love," I said into the microphone. My voice filled the ballroom, completely steady and completely devoid of warmth. 5 years ago, when the man bleeding on the floor married the woman weeping beside him, I gave them a wedding gift. I bought them a stunning $2 million mansion in the suburbs. I paid for it entirely in cash. I placed it in an irrevocable family trust so that my daughter would always have a roof over her head. I wanted her to be safe. I wanted her to be secure. I pointed to the document on the screen. But security is never enough for people who worship greed. The document you are looking at is a commercial mortgage for $1.5 million taken out against the equity of that very house. Now, according to the trust, that property could not be leveraged without the signature of the primary guarantor. And that guarantor is me. Victor clicked the mouse. The screen zoomed in on the final page of the document, blowing up the signature line so it was 10 feet tall. There, in thick black ink, was the name Desmond Carver. I looked down at Maya. She was staring at the screen, her eyes wide with absolute horror. She slowly backed away from me, shaking her head, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face. "That is my name," I told the crowd. "But it is not my handwriting. The man pinned to the floor is a degenerate gambler. He owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to a violent sports betting syndicate in Las Vegas. He burned through his own money and then he needed more. So my daughter, my own flesh and blood, sat down with a pen and forged my signature to steal $1.5 million from a bank to save him." The crowd gasped. Several investors took out their phones, snapping pictures of the massive forged document on the screen. Maya covered her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The illusion of the perfect, wealthy socialite was completely shattered. She was now exposed as a common criminal. But the story does not end there. I continued, my voice growing louder, carrying the heavy weight of absolute judgment. Because when you borrow money from a bank to feed a gambling addiction, the money vanishes quickly, the payments stop, and the bank comes collecting. Victor clicked the mouse again. A new document flashed onto the screen. It had bold red lettering at the top. Notice of default and foreclosure. Because they failed to make a single payment in 6 months, the bank initiated foreclosure proceedings, I explained to the captivated audience. Their $2 million mansion is being seized. The final eviction date is set for December 25th, Christmas Day. They were going to be thrown out into the snow. That is why they brought you all here tonight. That is why they needed your money so desperately. Preston groaned from the floor, struggling weakly against the heavy boot of my security guard. "Desmond, please," he rasped, his voice pathetic and broken. "Stop." I ignored him. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage, looking down at the investors. But let me share a little secret about the real estate business. Banks are always willing to sell toxic debt. When I discovered what my daughter and her husband had done, I did not go to the police. I went to the bank. Through an anonymous corporate shell company, I purchased their defaulted mortgage in its entirety. I paid off the loan sharks. I bought the paper. I turned to look down at Preston. I am your bank, Preston. I am your loan shark. I own the roof over your head, and I am the one who is evicting you on Christmas morning. You have absolutely nothing left. Preston stopped struggling. He lay flat against the wooden stage, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with the realization of his total, inescapable defeat. He was completely bankrupt. But I was not finished. The final bullet was still in the chamber. I turned my attention back to the crowd. Now let us address the real reason you dressed up in your finest clothes and came to this hotel tonight. Let us talk about the magnificent $20 million commercial development project Preston Sterling was pitching to you. The luxury shopping center that was going to double your investment in 6 months. Several of the wealthiest investors in the front row suddenly looked very nervous. Some of them had already signed preliminary term sheets earlier in the evening. Some of them had already handed Preston massive checks. I looked at Victor. He hit the final button. The screen flashed again. The beautiful, glossy architectural renderings of the shopping center vanished. They were replaced by a series of bleak, depressing photographs of an abandoned, rusting industrial site. Next to the photos were official government documents stamped with the seal of the Environmental Protection Agency. I own that plot of land, I announced, my voice cutting through the rising panic in the room. I bought it 10 years ago for pennies. It is not an approved commercial development site. It is a highly toxic radioactive industrial brownfield. The soil is saturated with heavy metals and illegal chemical runoff. It is completely worthless and legally condemned. The ballroom exploded into chaos. I created a fake master plan, I explained, shouting over the noise of the furious crowd. I fabricated the soil reports. I forged the municipal approvals. I left that fake dossier on my desk, and 3 days ago Preston Sterling hired a thug to break into my house in the middle of the night to steal it. He was so desperate for cash that he did not even verify the asset. He just repackaged my fake documents and brought them here tonight to sell to you. I pointed down at Preston. The man on the floor is not a brilliant hedge fund manager. He is a desperate thief. And by soliciting your money across state lines using fabricated environmental documents and a non-existent commercial property, he did not just commit a simple fraud. I paused, letting the final devastating reality sink in. Preston, I said, looking directly at my son-in-law. You just committed massive federal wire fraud and interstate securities fraud in front of 100 witnesses. The wealthy investors did not just gasp, they erupted into absolute unadulterated fury. These were men and women who destroyed companies for a living. They did not take kindly to being scammed by a desperate degenerate. A group of 5 aggressive venture capitalists stormed toward the front of the stage. One of them, a billionaire real estate tycoon who had just handed Preston a check for $1 million, pointed a trembling finger at the stage. "You miserable thief!" the tycoon roared, his face purple with rage. "Where is my money? Give me my check back right now, or I will bury you." Other investors joined the shouting. The sophisticated, elegant Christmas gala completely dissolved into a chaotic mob. Men in tuxedos were yelling obscenities. Women were demanding their investments back. People were pulling out their cell phones, frantically calling their lawyers and their banks to cancel the wire transfers they had authorized just an hour prior. Maya backed away until she hit the projection screen, sliding down it until she was sitting on the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, rocking back and forth. Her perfect emerald dress was ruined. Her social standing was instantly obliterated. She was watching her entire universe burn to the ground in real time. Preston lay on the floor, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his destruction. He was surrounded by furious billionaires screaming for his head. He had no money, he had no house, he had no reputation, and he was staring down the barrel of a federal prison sentence that would outlast his natural life. I stood at the podium watching the chaos unfold beneath me. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I had given them every opportunity to be a real family. I had given them my love, my protection, and my hard-earned wealth. They chose to spit on it. They chose to treat me like a disposable resource. I placed the microphone gently down on the podium. My work here was done. The match had been struck, the gasoline was lit, and the fire was raging exactly as I had planned. The grand ballroom of the Sterling Plaza Hotel had transformed into an absolute war zone. The elegant string quartet had packed their instruments and fled the stage long ago. The sophisticated waiters in their crisp white uniforms were backed against the walls, their eyes wide with shock as they watched the absolute destruction of a corporate titan. The wealthy investors, men and women who controlled billions of dollars, were no longer maintaining their polite high society composure. They were a furious, yelling mob. They swarmed the front of the stage, demanding their money, screaming threats of federal lawsuits, and completely dismantling Preston Sterling piece by piece. Preston was still pinned flat against the hard wooden floor of the stage by my massive security guard. He was not fighting anymore. He was broken. His expensive velvet tuxedo was wrinkled and covered in dust. He was weeping openly, a pathetic, high-pitched sound that was completely drowned out by the roaring crowd of billionaires who wanted his head on a spike. Maya watched her husband being trampled by the consequences of his own arrogance. She stood near the edge of the projection screen, her back pressed against the wall. I could see the exact moment the realization hit her. She saw the furious investors. She saw the federal crimes displayed on the massive screen. She saw the absolute end of her luxurious, privileged existence. There would be no more country club dinners. There would be no more shopping sprees with stolen money. There would only be lawyers, criminal trials, and total bankruptcy. She needed a lifeboat. She needed a way to survive the sinking ship. And like any true parasite, when one host dies, it immediately looks for another to latch onto. Maya turned her eyes toward me. She saw me standing tall and completely untouchable at the podium. She realized I was the only person in the room with the power and the money to save her from the fiery wreckage. She scrambled across the stage. Her beautiful floor-length emerald gown snagged on a microphone cable and tore, but she did not care. She threw herself onto the floor, crawling the last few feet until she reached the podium. She threw her arms around my legs, burying her face against my heavy scuffed work boots. The same work boots her husband had mocked. The same boots I had worn for decades to build the very wealth she tried to steal. "Daddy, please!" she sobbed loudly. Her voice was shrill and completely hysterical, echoing through the microphone stand. "You have to believe me. I did not know how bad it was. Preston lied to me about everything. He manipulated me, Daddy. He forced me to sign those mortgage papers. He told me we were just protecting your assets. He told me you were really sick and we needed to take control. I am a victim here. He used me just like he tried to use you. Please, Daddy, you have to save me. I am your little girl." I looked down at the top of her head. Her perfectly styled hair was a mess. Her expensive makeup was running down her cheeks in dark, ugly streaks. For a fraction of a second, a phantom pain flared deep inside my chest. This was my child. This was the baby I used to rock to sleep in the middle of the night. This was the little girl I had promised Vivian I would always protect. But that father, the man who would have given his last breath for his daughter, died standing in the freezing rain on Thanksgiving night. I did not reach down to stroke her hair. I did not offer her a comforting word. I stood as rigid and cold as a statue carved from solid iron. "You are a victim," I repeated slowly. I leaned closer to the microphone, my voice booming through the ballroom, cutting through the shouting crowd. The room began to quiet down again. The furious investors stopped yelling at Preston and turned their attention back to the stage. They were drawn to the spectacle of a family completely tearing itself apart. The silence that settled over the room was thick with anticipation. "You think you are a victim, Maya?" I continued, my tone devoid of any parental warmth. "You think you can blame the pathetic man on the floor for the darkness in your own soul? You think you can play the innocent little girl and I will just open my wallet and make all the bad things go away?" I looked over at the audio-visual booth. Victor was still standing there, his suit immaculate, his hand resting calmly on the computer mouse. I gave him one final definitive nod. It was time to pull the last pin on the grenade. "Let us see exactly how much of a victim you really are, Maya," I announced to the hushed ballroom. "Let us listen to what you say when you think nobody is listening." The giant screen behind me went black. The fabricated environmental documents vanished. A new green audio waveform appeared in the center of the display. Victor pressed play. The pristine acoustic system of the grand ballroom broadcasted a recording captured just a few nights ago right inside Preston and Maya's own living room. The sound quality was perfect, captured by the smart home security system Roxanne had so easily hacked. First, the crowd heard Preston's voice. It was desperate and manipulative, exactly as he had been when he tried to force me to sign the power of attorney. "We need full legal guardianship over his entire estate," the recorded Preston pleaded. "We can force him into a state-run psychiatric facility. We can legally liquidate his house, his truck, and any secret pensions he has buried away." The investors gasped in horror. They were ruthless in business, but even they found the idea of locking a sane family member in an asylum to be incredibly repulsive. But then the real horror began. The speakers broadcasted Maya's voice. It was not the voice of a scared, manipulated victim. It was not the voice of a woman being forced into a crime against her will. It was cold, calculating, and ruthlessly transactional. "If we do this," her recorded voice echoed through the massive ballroom. "If I help you put him in a facility and drain his assets, I want total undisputed control of the liquidated funds. You do not touch a single dime without my approval, and the girl in Miami is gone. You cut the lease, you cut the wire transfers, and she never exists again. Or I will gladly go to federal prison just to watch you burn next to me." The recording ended with a sharp click. The silence that fell over the ballroom this time was absolutely nauseating. It was the silence of complete and total moral disgust. I looked out at the faces of the most powerful people in Chicago. I saw wealthy matriarchs clutching their evening bags, staring at Maya with absolute revulsion. I saw hardened corporate raiders shaking their heads in pure disgust. To conspire to lock your own healthy, loving father in a psychiatric ward just to maintain a life of luxury and to punish a cheating husband was a level of evil that made their blood run cold. Maya had just publicly revealed herself to be a monster. Maya froze at my feet. Her loud sobbing stopped instantly. The fake tears dried up. She slowly let go of my boots and looked up at me. Her face was ghostly pale. Her lips were trembling so hard she could not even form a word. She knew there was no way to manipulate her way out of this. There was no lie she could spin. Her own voice had just convicted her in front of the entire world. Her social standing, her reputation, her entire identity was permanently annihilated. I reached down, grabbed her firmly by the shoulders, and forcibly peeled her away from my legs. I stood her up, so she had to look me directly in the eyes. She tried to look away, but my grip was like a vice. I did not yell. I did not need to. My voice was a low, devastating whisper that carried perfectly through the microphone for everyone in the room to hear. "You are not a victim." "Maya," I said, my words slicing through the heavy air like a razor blade. "You are an accomplice. You sold your own father for a mansion you could not afford and a man you could not trust. You made your choice. Now you get to live with it." I let go of her shoulders. She stumbled backward, completely broken, staring at me as if she was looking at a stranger. And she was. The father she thought she could easily destroy was gone forever. I turned my back on her and looked toward the back doors of the ballroom. The final act of the night was about to arrive. The heavy silence in the grand ballroom was suddenly broken by a sound that pierced through the thick, snow-covered windows of the hotel. It started as a distant wail echoing down the frozen streets of downtown Chicago. Within seconds, the sound multiplied and grew louder. It was the undeniable piercing shriek of multiple police sirens. The wealthy investors turned their heads toward the massive glass entrance of the ballroom. Red and blue emergency lights began to flash violently against the falling snow outside, throwing harsh, rotating colors across the crystal chandeliers and the elegant white walls of the venue. The flashing lights painted the faces of the billionaires in alternating shades of crimson and blue. I did not move from my spot at the podium. I simply stood tall and watched. I knew exactly who was coming. Earlier that afternoon, while Preston was busy agonizing over the guest list for this fake charity gala, Roxanne had made a very special delivery. She did not just hack Preston's emails for my personal amusement. Roxanne compiled every single piece of evidence. The offshore wire transfers, the missing hedge fund millions, the fabricated environmental reports, and the forged commercial mortgage. She packaged it all into a neat, highly encrypted digital file and handed it directly to the lead investigator of the white-collar crime division at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Federal agents do not ignore a perfectly documented case of interstate securities fraud, especially when it involves millions of stolen investor funds. The heavy wooden double doors at the back of the grand ballroom burst open. A blast of freezing winter air rushed into the warm room, bringing with it a dozen federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with the letters FBI printed across the back in bold yellow type. They were flanked by a team of uniformed Chicago police officers. Their heavy tactical boots tracked melting snow and dirty slush onto the pristine marble floors of the hotel. The crowd of elite investors instantly parted. These were men and women who commanded massive corporations, but nobody in that room wanted to be standing anywhere near a federal raid. They scrambled backward, knocking over cocktail tables and spilling expensive champagne onto the floor, desperate to get out of the way of the advancing authorities. The lead federal agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a face carved out of granite, marched straight down the center aisle. He did not look at the ice sculptures or the terrified socialites. His eyes were locked dead onto the stage. My private security guards saw the agents approaching and immediately took a step back, lifting their hands to show they were not a threat. They grabbed Preston by the collar of his ruined velvet tuxedo and hauled him to his feet, handing him over to the federal authorities like a piece of garbage. Preston could barely stand. His legs were shaking so violently that two agents had to hold him up by his arms. The blood had completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent shade of gray. He looked like a corpse that had just been pulled from the river. Preston Sterling, the lead agent, announced, his voice carrying the absolute uncompromising weight of the United States government. You are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, interstate securities fraud, and corporate embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The agent grabbed Preston's wrists, yanked them behind his back, and secured them with a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. The metallic click of the locking mechanism echoed sharply through the silent ballroom. It was the sound of a man's life officially ending. Preston did not fight. He did not yell for a lawyer. The sheer magnitude of his destruction had completely short-circuited his brain. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked out at the crowd of investors, the very people he had tried to scam just an hour ago, but they only stared back at him with cold, calculating disgust. He looked up at me standing at the podium, but he found absolutely no mercy in my eyes. I stared back at him, watching the man who had plotted to throw me in a psychiatric ward being dragged away in chains. But the federal agents were not the only law enforcement in the room. A local Chicago police detective stepped around the FBI agents and walked directly toward the projection screen where Maya was still sitting on the floor, shivering in her torn emerald gown. Maya looked up at the detective. For a brief delusional second, she thought he was there to help her. She thought she was just the tragic wife caught in the crossfire of her husband's corporate crimes. She reached her hand up, expecting the detective to help her to her feet. Instead, the detective pulled a pair of handcuffs from his duty belt. Maya Carver. The detective said, his voice flat and professional. You are under arrest for felony forgery of commercial documents, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit elder fraud. Maya froze. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers. She scrambled backward on the wooden stage, her heels slipping against the floor. No! She shrieked, her voice echoing with absolute terror. No, you do not understand. My husband did it. He forced me. I did not do anything wrong. I am the victim. The detective did not care about her tears. He reached down, grabbed her firmly by the arm, and pulled her up. She thrashed and fought, sobbing hysterically as he twisted her arms behind her back. The cold steel cuffs snapped tightly around her wrists, pinning them against the back of her expensive designer dress. Daddy, Maya screamed at the top of her lungs, turning her head frantically to look at me. Daddy, tell them I did not mean to do it. Please do not let them take me. I am your daughter. Save me. I stood at the podium and looked at her. I remembered the audio recording that had played just moments ago, the sound of her cold, calculating voice demanding total control of my liquidated assets after she locked me away. She was not a scared little girl. She was a grown woman facing the exact consequences she had engineered for me. I did not say a word. I simply turned my head away and looked out into the crowd. The detective pushed Maya forward, marching her down the stairs of the stage. She continued to sob and scream my name, begging for a rescue that was never going to come. The police escorted her and Preston down the center aisle of the ballroom, parading them in chains past the wealthiest, most influential people in the city. Their public humiliation was absolute and irreversible. The heavy wooden doors closed behind them, cutting off Maya's frantic screams. The moment the police left, the spell over the ballroom was broken. The elite investors did not stay to ask questions or offer sympathies. In the world of high finance, you do not stand next to a burning building. You run. Within minutes, the grand ballroom turned into a stampede of wealthy socialites rushing for the exit. Men grabbed their coats, barking orders into their cell phones, frantically instructing their accountants to sever any remaining ties with Preston's hedge fund. Women gathered their expensive purses and hurried out the doors, desperate to escape the radioactive scandal that had just exploded in their faces. The caterers and hotel staff, sensing that nobody was going to pay the massive bill for this extravagant party, quickly began packing up their equipment. They rolled away the carts of expensive champagne. They cleared the untouched caviar. They took the silver trays and vanished through the service doors. I stood completely still on the stage and watched the room empty out. It happened incredibly fast. In less than 20 minutes, the grand luxurious gala was reduced to an absolute wasteland. I walked slowly down the stairs of the stage. My heavy construction boots echoed loudly against the hardwood floor. I stepped onto the plush carpet of the main room. It was covered in spilled wine, crushed cocktail napkins, and muddy footprints left behind by the fleeing guests and the federal agents. The massive ice sculptures, shaped like dollar signs, were already beginning to melt, dripping water onto the floor in a slow, pathetic rhythm. The heating system in the ballroom had been overwhelmed by the doors being left open during the raid. The freezing winter wind was blowing inside, bringing snowflakes that danced through the air and melted against the warm crystal chandeliers. The room was chilling rapidly. The air felt heavy, desolate, and completely hollow. I walked over to a small cocktail table near the center of the room. There was a single untouched glass of water resting on it. I picked it up and took a slow sip, letting the cool liquid wash away the dryness in my throat. It was over. The house of cards had completely collapsed. The people who had tried to bury me alive were now sitting in the back of police cruisers, heading toward cold concrete cells where their designer clothes and arrogant attitudes would mean absolutely nothing. I stood alone in the freezing, ruined ballroom. I was a 74-year-old man who had just orchestrated the total destruction of his own family. A normal man might have felt a crushing sense of loss or a hollow, aching guilt. But as I looked around at the wreckage of their greed, I did not feel any guilt at all. I felt the pure, unadulterated peace of a man who had finally cut the rot out of his foundation. I set the water glass back down on the table. I adjusted the collar of my faded flannel shirt, turned my back on the empty room, and began the long walk toward the exit. It was time to go home. I am Desmond Carver, 74 years old, and I spent my entire life building an empire in the shadows. I always believed that blood was thicker than water, but I learned the hard way that blood means absolutely nothing when greed takes over. I was late for Thanksgiving dinner at my daughter's house. The freezing rain soaked my clothes as I stood on her porch. But when I looked through the glass door, I saw my son-in-law making a toast. He raised his crystal glass and said, "I hope the old man is gone for good. We are finally getting the house." My own daughter laughed along with their wealthy friends. I did not knock. I walked away. But when I got to my truck and checked my phone, I realized the betrayal was much worse. $80,000 had just been drained from my account. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. 2 weeks is a strange measurement of time. In the construction business, 2 weeks is barely enough time to pour a foundation and let the concrete properly cure. But in the justice system, 2 weeks is more than enough time to completely obliterate a human life, especially when that life was built on a foundation of lies, stolen money, and toxic arrogance. It was a Tuesday morning. The winter sun was pale and weak, barely cutting through the gray Chicago clouds. I was standing in the grand foyer of the $2 million mansion that I had bought for my daughter 5 years ago. The house felt entirely different now. The pretentious modern art was gone. The expensive Persian rugs were rolled up and hauled away. The air did not smell like expensive perfume and catered food anymore. It smelled like sawdust, fresh paint, and hard work. I had hired a crew of 12 men. They were busy tearing down the customized wine cellar and ripping out the imported marble wet bar. I stood in the center of the chaos wearing my old work boots and my canvas jacket, watching the demolition with a deep, quiet satisfaction. The heavy oak front door slowly pushed open. Maya walked in. She did not look like the glamorous socialite who had commanded the ballroom 2 weeks ago. The emerald gown was a distant memory. She was wearing cheap gray sweatpants, a faded hoodie, and old sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot. Her face was pale drawn and completely devoid of makeup. She looked exactly like what she was, a criminal out on bail waiting for the hammer to officially fall. She stood in the doorway clutching a few folded cardboard boxes. She stared at the construction workers tearing down the walls of her former kingdom. Her eyes were wide with shock and disbelief. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice trembling as she looked around the ruined foyer. "What is happening to my house?" I turned around and looked at her. "It is not your house, Maya," I said, my voice cutting easily through the noise of the power tools. "It never was. You just lived in it until you decided to forge my signature and hand it over to a bank, and now the bank has handed it back to me." She swallowed hard, looking down at her cheap shoes. "I came to get my things," she muttered quietly. "The judge granted me supervised bail until the trial. I am allowed to collect my personal belongings, my clothes, my bags, my jewelry. I need to sell them to pay for a defense attorney. The public defender they gave me is completely useless." I let out a short, hollow laugh. It was not a sound of amusement. It was a sound of absolute chilling reality. "You are a little late for that," I told her. She looked up, her brow furrowed in panic. "What do you mean?" I pointed up the grand sweeping staircase toward the master suite. "Did you really think you could keep the spoils of your crimes, Maya? Did you think the federal government was just going to let you pack up your Hermes bags and your Louboutin shoes after you and your husband defrauded investors out of millions?" Her face went completely white. She dropped the cardboard boxes on the floor. "Everything upstairs is gone," I explained, walking slowly toward her. "The federal agents and the bankruptcy courts came through here 3 days ago. They seized the designer dresses. They seized the diamond necklaces. They seized every single expensive handbag and watch in this entire building. They are auctioning it all off to compensate the investors you helped scam and to pay down the massive tax lien your husband so graciously accepted in probate court. You have absolutely nothing left to sell." "No," she gasped, shaking her head frantically. "No, they cannot do that. Those were my personal items. I need those. I need a real lawyer." "You should have thought about needing a real lawyer before you conspired to lock your healthy father in a psychiatric ward," I replied coldly. She covered her face with her hands. A pathetic, whimpering sob escaped her lips, but the tears did not move me. I had seen her fake tears too many times. Preston was denied bail. I continued, making sure she heard every single word of her new reality. "He is sitting in a federal holding cell downtown. The prosecutors are offering him a plea deal of 15 years in a maximum security penitentiary, and that is only if he cooperates completely. His fancy suits and his arrogant smile will not help him in there." Maya lowered her hands. She looked at me with eyes full of pure, unadulterated terror. "And what about me?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "You are facing 5 years for felony forgery, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit elder fraud," I told her flatly. "And because you have no assets, no hidden accounts, and no rich father to bail you out anymore, you get to wait for your trial in the real world. I spoke to your parole officer. I know where they placed you." She looked away, utterly humiliated. "A Section 8 public housing complex on the worst side of the city," I said, making her face the reality of her destination. "A small, cramped, rotting apartment with peeling paint and bars on the windows. You are going to learn exactly how the other half lives, Maya. You are going to learn what it feels like to have absolutely nothing." She looked around the grand foyer again, watching the construction workers carry out the remnants of her luxurious life. She looked at the torn drywall and the exposed wires. "Why are you tearing it down?" she asked, her voice hollow. "If you own the house, why are you destroying it?" "I am not destroying it," I corrected her. "I am repurposing it. I sold this entire property and the surrounding land yesterday morning. I sold it for exactly $1. She stared at me, completely baffled. $1. To who? "To the City Orphan Foundation," I replied, crossing my arms over my chest. "This house is too big for one family, but it is perfectly sized for 30 children who actually need a roof over their heads. These workers are converting your grand ballroom into a cafeteria. Your master bedroom is becoming a dormitory. The walls that housed your greed and your arrogance are going to shelter kids who have nothing. This property is finally going to serve a decent purpose." Maya fell to her knees right there in the foyer. The reality of her total, inescapable ruin crashed down on her shoulders. She had lost her husband. She had lost her wealth. She had lost her freedom. And now the very symbol of her status was being dismantled and given away to the less fortunate. "Daddy, please," she begged, crawling forward on her knees until she was right in front of my boots. "Please, I cannot survive in that public housing complex. I cannot go to prison. I will not make it. You have to help me. You have millions. You have the best lawyers in the city. You can fix this for me. I will do anything. I will clean your floors. I will take care of you. Just please do not leave me like this." I looked down at her. She was pleading for her life. She was begging for the very mercy she had planned to strip away from me. "You made your bed, Maya," I said, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. "Now you have to lie in it." "But I am your daughter," she screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings, desperate and shrill. "You cannot do this to me. I am your own flesh and blood." I leaned down slightly, looking her dead in the tear-filled eyes. "Blood makes you related," I whispered, every word sharp and deliberate. "But respect makes you family. And you stopped being my family the moment you decided my life was worth less than your lifestyle." I stood back up. I did not give her another second of my time. I turned around and walked toward the heavy oak front door. "Daddy, no," she wailed behind me. I stepped outside onto the porch. The winter air was freezing, but it felt incredibly clean. I looked back inside the house. Maya was still on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably amidst the sawdust and the noise of the construction drills. I grabbed the heavy brass handle of the front door. I pulled it shut. The heavy wood slammed into the frame with a loud, final, echoing thud. The lock clicked into place. I stood on the porch listening to the silence outside. I did not feel a single drop of regret. I had just closed the door on the most toxic chapter of my life and locked it forever. I walked down the heated driveway toward my old Chevy truck. The sun was finally breaking through the gray clouds, casting a bright, clear light over the snow-covered lawns. I had a lot of work to do today, and for the first time in years I felt completely free. I am Desmond Carver, 74 years old, and I spent my entire life building an empire in the shadows. I always believed that blood was thicker than water, but I learned the hard way that blood means absolutely nothing when greed takes over. I was late for Thanksgiving dinner at my daughter's house. The freezing rain soaked my clothes as I stood on her porch. But when I looked through the glass door, I saw my son-in-law making a toast. He raised his crystal glass and said, "I hope the old man is gone for good. We are finally getting the house." My own daughter laughed along with their wealthy friends. I did not knock. I walked away. But when I got to my truck and checked my phone, I realized the betrayal was much worse. $80,000 had just been drained from my account. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The engine of my 1998 Chevy Silverado hummed a steady, familiar rhythm as I drove through the quiet streets of the city. The massive snowstorm that had buried Chicago 2 weeks ago was finally beginning to melt. The sky above was a brilliant, piercing blue, completely clear of the heavy gray clouds that had hung over my life for so long. I rolled the window down just an inch, letting the crisp, biting winter air fill the cabin of the truck. I took a deep breath. For the first time in years, the air tasted clean. I pulled through the wrought iron gates of the cemetery on the south side of the city. It was a peaceful place, far away from the noise of downtown and the toxic ambition of the wealthy suburbs. I parked the truck under the bare branches of a massive oak tree, turned off the engine, and stepped out into the quiet morning. I walked down the familiar paved path until I reached a simple, elegant marble headstone. Vivian Carver, beloved wife and mother. I stood in front of her grave, taking off my old canvas hat. I did not bring expensive imported flowers. I brought a small, vibrant bouquet of yellow daisies, the exact same flowers I used to buy her from the corner store when we were young, broke, and fiercely in love. I laid them gently against the cold marble. I stood there for a long time, looking at her name carved into the stone. I did what I had to do. "Vivian," I whispered to the empty air. My voice was steady, but it carried the heavy weight of the last month. I tried to protect our daughter. I tried to give her the world, but I forgot to teach her how to carry it. The money poisoned her, Vivian. It turned her into someone we would not even recognize. I had to stop her. I had to let her fall so she could finally see the ground. I hope you can forgive me for not saving her from herself. A gentle breeze swept through the cemetery, rustling the dead leaves on the path. I felt a strange, comforting warmth settle over my shoulders. I knew Vivian understood. She was a woman who valued hard work and honesty above all else. She would have been heartbroken by Maya's betrayal, but she would have stood right beside me when I brought the hammer down on their greed. But I am not letting our legacy die in the dirt. I continued, a small, genuine smile finally breaking across my weathered face. I found a better way to use what we built. Earlier that morning, I had sat in Victor's office and signed the final paperwork for a massive financial restructuring. I took $10 million from the liquidated commercial trust and established a permanent, irrevocable charitable foundation. It was not a foundation for the arts or a tax shelter for the wealthy. It was a dedicated scholarship and grant fund specifically designed for underprivileged Black youth in the poorest neighborhoods of Chicago. I'm giving it to the kids who remind me of us, Vivian, I told her. The kids who are pouring concrete, scrubbing floors, and working night shifts just to pay for textbooks. The young men and women who have the fire and the brilliance but just need a solid foundation to stand on. We are going to help them build their own empires. They are our real legacy now. Saying those words out loud felt like breaking heavy iron chains off my chest. The crushing burden of protecting an ungrateful, toxic family was completely gone. I was no longer the silent, submissive old man hiding in the shadows waiting for his greedy heirs to decide his fate. I was Desmond Carver. I was the absolute master of my own destiny. I had reclaimed my life, my wealth, and my dignity, and I was going to spend my remaining years spreading opportunity to people who actually understood the value of a dollar and the meaning of respect. I put my canvas hat back on and touched the top of Vivian's headstone one last time. I turned my back to the grave and walked toward my old Chevy truck. My steps were not heavy. My joints did not ache. I walked with the purpose and the power of a man who had just conquered his own demons. Blood does not give anyone a free pass to exploit, disrespect, or destroy you. We often endure toxic behavior from family members because society teaches us that family is everything, but true family is built on mutual respect, honesty, and care. When those you sacrificed for view your kindness as a weakness and your life as a mere resource to be drained, walking away is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. Dignity has no age limit, and it is never too late to reclaim your worth and let the ruthless face the consequences of their own greed. Thank you for listening to my story. If my journey resonated with you, or if you have ever had to cut ties with toxic people to protect your own peace, let me know in the comments below. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful life stories. Remember to always stand tall, protect your dignity, and never let anyone make you feel small. See you in the next video.